do that. I do that on the Mac Minis in my lab over in the library, and that's a triple boot, and it's EFI with OS 10, of course, is the primary operating system. So,
are you using Grub 2 as the boot system?
No, I can't remember what the bootloader is that I'm using over there. It's a fork of an EFI-based bootloader. I'm actually kind of surprised because I'm guessing that TK's machine is probably EFI, which might be why she's having some of these problems.
That's probably why I guess. I remember I did EFI first kind of a little research, and I'm like, yeah, no, I'm not dealing with this. I'm just virtualizing everything from here on out.
Yeah, but there were, I don't know.
It's simple.
But yeah, I'm totally with you. Like, I love the old BIOS days. You just drop in, write a little script. No problem.
It was simple. I'm not quite sure exactly what EFI does outside of some really obscure security things, but at that point, you've already lost it. It does some nice things for physical security, but in my mind, if they have the device, you've already lost.
Right.
Because at that point, you're doing something wrong. Unfortunately, I was not able to install it, just time, so I'll do that today.
All right.
Having issues, I'll let you know.
What issues?
If I have issues with installing, I'll let you know.
Yeah.
I can't decide if that's like a $50 thing or if that's just like a $10 thing. The stand.
It's ridiculously. I think it was. I itemized it on my taxes this year. It was like $60 or something like that.
Oh, snap.
For a piece of plastic that folds up, but
it's not even metal.
There's parts of it that are metallic, some kind of alloy. I don't think it's just plastic, but I still like. And as expensive as it is, I ordered like 3 of them, and this was the one that I hated the least.
It does seem handy though.
It's handy, and because I don't, I know that there's lots of faculty who sit, and I find that abhorrent. But I like to stand and not be completely Quasimodo like.
Yeah, it probably helps your posture after a while.
Well, Dean, would you actually? Hey, look at this.
What?
Remember this from 362? Yay! This is what I was looking for. I don't have to bring this thing anymore.
I forgot it.
Yeah, remember that? I used to put this up every single day. Oh, because this is great. Isabel, where would you be less blocked if I'm standing here or here?
Neither.
I mean, I move around like a moth anyway. Oh, yes. Thank you. Oh, bye-bye. I'll never see you again until the fall. It does. Everything about it is very nice. The problem is that it's just the angle on the keyboard is this, and so I get like this just claws from. Okay, let's see. Clear off my personal business here before I forget.
Always good.
It occurred to me, I wonder that there's only 3 of you here. If everybody realized that this was a Tuesday, Wednesday class, and if they're going to show up tomorrow morning.
For some reason, I thought it was Tuesday, Thursday until last week, and I was quite pleased it wasn't.
Yeah, I always knew it was Tuesday, Wednesday, but it actually works great for me because I've got a class in COD Friday, Saturday, so it gives me a day off.
Okay. Oh, I didn't want to do that.
Anatomy. That's when Ruby and anatomy at the same time. Could not be more different.
Okay. My cough drops. I came home yesterday, had no voice.
That's not good.
No. And it's amazing how fast it goes away. Because like in the middle of the semester when I'm hardcore into teaching, like as students will tell you, I can talk a lot for a long time.
Oh yeah.
But even being away from just a couple of weeks. Okay. Yeah, I should start bringing my water bottle soon. And not just my coffee. Mama's got her coffee this morning and her water. Water all the way. All right. I would assume that everyone else is not coming. So today, I posted the video from yesterday right here on the calendar. I just slopped it up last night, like here's the video, but I'm gonna go and make like links to like, here's part 1, here's part 2, and do the little YouTube-y timestamps on them so that you can jump. What's that?
I know you can do like longer videos to verify your account.
Yeah, oh yeah, I can do it. I'm talking more about like instead of just having one 3-hour, that it'll have some markers on it. So today, we gotta fix our car method for braking. I was so proud of that simple if statement on there that and didn't test it under the right conditions. And so last night I was going back through everything I did, discovered it's not working. So we'll start with that. Then we'll do iterators and blocks, which are one thing that we didn't talk about yesterday. Then we're going to go through some style guide stuff. We're going to look at some of the standard libraries and core classes. We'll do that as part of the Ruby documentation, which I thought I linked that, but that's okay. The link is down here on the reading. We'll look at devdocs.io, open source culture and practices, and then if there's time, we'll hit a little bit of Sinatra, which as I was playing around with it last night, discovered there's something broken with it, which is interesting. Always good when you get an error message and you Google it, and there's like 3 other pages that have that exact error, and they're all from like May 1st. So there's some new error. But I found a way around it. Okay, so let's see. Oh, the other thing I did, which is my custom and practice, as lawyers would say, was I'm going to put all of the, at least for this week, or yesterday and today, put the demos in directories by date. So I'm going to go cheat, though, and... What do you mean not found? Did I not do that on this machine? Come on. There it is. Oh, there's Tarun. All right, let's see. Install shell commands. Okay. So why didn't that work? Now it's there. All right. Got what I wanted anyway. So car, RB. This guy is not working properly. And I discovered that because I was testing some things last night. And let's see, let's go into this 523 directory. I'm going to fire up herb. So if I use the load command, Tarun, that allows us to reload this thing over and over again. I forgot, because this is one of those things where I get cross chatter in my brain. So if this were Node.js, or Node, you do .load, and then you can bring up your file. Herb respects load, and it will reload the entire class or whatever else is in the file. So if I do just a simple car variable, car new, it's a Ford. All right, and if I do car accelerate, you're going 1 miles per hour. Why isn't it not working? Oh, because the problem is on how I implemented the brake method, right? You're going 2 miles per hour, you are stopped, okay? So, and as I was looking at, before I even was mucking with it, I realized like I really hated this particular line. Let me turn the lights differently here so this thing isn't so washed out. I didn't like this puts line, right? That seems messy for a method that is just, again, single responsibility, right? It should do one thing. So the best way I can think of to fix this is let's drop both of these putses into how fast, right? Because how you are stopped is a good response to how fast am I going? You're not, okay? Which means then we can also get rid of this how fast inside the if statement, right? So if we do that, then we can keep our nice little clean if statement here. We're only going to decrement speed if we're moving, And we're always going to say how fast we're going. And now how fast can be the thing that's in charge of saying whether we're stopped, right? So we can say if at speed, and here's another operator we didn't talk about yesterday, the double equals sign, right? Which means we're not doing assignment. We're not saying speed is equal to 0 here, right? We're checking to see if speed is equal to 0. If it is, then we'll put that we're stopped. Otherwise, so we do else, then we indent again, and then end, okay? The other nice thing about this, let me test this just because, right? Because we can call that how fast method. We can call how fast. And of course, the way that I'd written it yesterday, it's always going to report some miles per hour, even if we're stopped, right? Now, with this method, it's been improved so that if we're not moving, we can say, you are stopped, right? So this is a really Ruby-like thing to do here, where we're just cleaning things up, simplifying it, and making sure that every method is exactly responsible for one thing, right? Here's another, I just started playing with Atom in a serious way the last couple days. It starts highlighting files differently if they're different from what's in your Git repository, which is totally handy, right? So we can go back over to, yeah, that's great. Yeah, I'm a fan. I've got deep loyalties to BB Edit, but I got to say, Atom's pretty nice. All right, so let's try reloading our car class here. And now we can do car is equal to car new. Chevy, with the most annoying commercials in the world where they hold their Chevy fans hostage and make them say nice things about Chevy. Right, so we can call now how fast. And it says you are stopped, right? And we can accelerate. Do this a few times, and then we can do break, and now we're getting the correct, boom, we're stopped, just like that, okay? So let's make a quick commit of this one so we've kept track of what we're doing, right? And of course, if you've not used Git before, or if you've not used Git recently, or if you've just used Git enough to get by the seat of your pants, one thing that I always like to do before I make a commit is run this git status command. I've got it aliased to gits, which is the same as running git status. And then I always like to do a git diff so I can see exactly what this commit is going to represent, right? So we got rid of this how fast in here. We actually moved it over here. We got rid of this sad little puts here. And then we redefined our how fast method. So we got basically this new logic here. We've got all of that in. All right? So I can do git add and then git commit -m, and we'll say improved, break, and how fast methods. All right. And now I'm going to push this to GitHub. One other thing, as long as I'm pushing to GitHub and we're talking about GitHub, you can tell that I am being very precise about my indentation, right? This is the true Ruby way of formatting source. I'm not cutting corners anywhere in terms of these indentations. It's always good, though, to make sure, even though we believe that the editor is set up correctly to handle spaces and not tabs, to look at this thing on GitHub itself, which, of course, you can go from this all code written in class link now, and that will take you to this repository. You're also welcome to watch it or to star it or anything like that if you want to look at it. So here we can see the car file, and GitHub will faithfully render spaces and tabs. And when it does render a tab, it's like 4 or maybe even 6 spaces wide. So when I'm looking at this, I can tell right away, yes, I'm correctly indenting this thing with spaces. So it can be a good thing to check your source formatting on GitHub at least the first few times that you push from a new editor. Now, there's one other part of a class that we didn't talk about yesterday that I also want to add, which is getting at these instance variables. And there's a little piece of magic. We should look at this in the documentation later. But we can do this attribute reader. And this is just a little method like anything else. It's already been defined for us. And we pass to it symbols of the things that we would like to make available from our object. Okay? Which means that now, once those things are in place, go back over to herb, load car.rb. Oops. Let's make it a string, though, shall we? All right. Thanks, Tarun, for the Control-L trick. I was doing that all night last night. It made me so happy. All right, so we'll do another car. Yeah. Make it a Ford again, right? Now we can call those instance variables directly. We can say car speed. We can say car make, right? So we get what look like little methods here, right? Just based on the instance variables that we've created with the class. We're going to see this pattern. Actually, what we'll see here, let's change. So I can read these values, but if I change this to accessor, right? Again, let me just copy this line so I don't have to retype, make a new car every time. Okay, so we'll reload this. So now I can do car make, and it's a Ford, but I can also, now that I've got that accessor call, I can assign it a new make. So we have a shape-shifting car that now suddenly is a Buick, right? So if I call car make, it's a Buick. Now, there's certain cases in classes where you don't want people to be able to write things, right? If we're writing a banking application, we don't want to be able to do instance variable dot balance and let somebody say, oh, I have, $100,000 in the bank now, whereas before I had $37.20, right? So, but for something like this, we can just play with that. And of course, this allows us to have instant acceleration too, because we can say our speed is, 60 now. So now we're going, if we go car, how fast? 60 miles per hour. Yes, Tarun?
If you remove that line at the top and try to do this, what would happen?
Let's see. Okay, so we'll delete that. Actually, let's keep it. We haven't talked about how to do comments in Ruby yet. There we go. So we just do a little hash mark like that, right? No, I think Ruby is pretty much a hash-only operation. We should check the documentation, though. Yes. Okay, so let's reload our car again. This time without those nice little convenience methods. We'll create our new car, and now we can do car.speed. We should get, what? We shouldn't be getting any of that.
Yeah, because I think you might have to explicitly declare them private.
Really?
I'm just assuming from other languages too.
Huh. Because I've had it before where working in Rails actually, where there's some new property that I've added and it gives me a method not found error or something of that ilk. Let's just one more time with feeling. Let's go herb, start up fresh. There we go. That's what we should get. So it was holding on to those somewhere deep in its internal. So we've got undefined method speed for car, right? And of course, Ruby has its little ways of torturing us, right? Because it dumps out this unique identifier for that car object. And it also tells us the instance variables that we're actually going for in the first place, right? So yeah, so if we put this attribute accessor line back in place, now we can both read and write that. And of course, there's attribute accessor, there's attribute writer. So if we want to just make something writable, which is kind of weird, usually you do that when there's some deeper method that's happening that's going to make the value available. And we've got reader that just allows us to read it. So we'll just do attribute accessor here. All right, let's try reloading this car again. Car.speed. There we go. Car.make. Ford, just like that. Okay, let's make a commit. there where we're adding just that line. All right. Cool. All right, so let's say goodbye now to.
That like that is smart enough to know that it's private if you don't have those, and
Right.
public or protected if you have those.
All right, so I'm going to make a new directory here in the demos repo, and let's go inside of this thing. We're going to call this thing blocks.rb. And actually, just for the just to jump around, because I can never stick with my own plan, let's pull open the Ruby docs API documentation here. And specifically, yeah, that's not what I want. Let's see if not orb. Yeah, that's not what I want. I'm not awake yet. That's okay. So yesterday, we saw these if statements, right? Did we look at while loops yesterday? We didn't talk about loops at all. Okay, so before we get to blocks, let's talk about looping structures. Generally in programming languages, right? What does a loop do? It loops. Okay, so what's our most famous loop that we have? Okay, there's the for loop. I'm going to put an asterisk by this one because we never write for loops in Ruby. All right, what's a for loop like construction? While loop. Okay, so if I just on the board write some Ruby, if I do while true, what have I created? Infinite loop, right? Because true is always going to be true until the heat death of the universe, right? We're going to run out of CPU cycles long before that, right? So we do while, and then we have some kind of condition, right? So we might do something like while speed is greater than 0. Make a little slash there so it's clear that's speed. While speed is greater than 0, we can do at speed minus equals 1, right? Which will slow us down to a stop as we go through this loop. It'll happen what will appear to be instantaneously because, of course, we go through loops very much. And that will eventually end, and eventually we'll end up down here where speed is equal to 1, right? Or will it go down to 0? It'll go down to 0. Okay. Because speed will equal to 1 the last time through the loop. Speed minus 1, so speed equals 0. So we have some condition, and then we end it, and then we're doing something. And of course, the key thing is this, where we're making some adjustment to the thing that we're checking the truth condition of in the middle of the loop. Now, Ruby also has an evil twin to this loop called until, right? So if we want to speed up, we could say until speed is greater than 60, right? And then do something where we're accelerating. So we've got that loop as well. Basically the not condition. So instead of saying while not something, we can just say until something, until this is true. So that until, so this loop will run while this condition is true, until will run until the condition is false. Or no. Yes. Boy, more coffee, please. While will run while the condition is true. Until will run until the condition is true. And then until won't run anymore. Okay. Okay. So this for loop thing, there is a for loop constructor in Ruby. The way that it works in languages like JavaScript is we basically do something like this, right? So we do, outside the loop, we do something like var I equals 0, right? And this is JavaScript over here. So we do I is equal to 0, and then we say for var I is less than 10, I plus plus, right? So we're incrementing it through the loop. And we might do something like we have an array, right? And here we go with the curly braces, right? And then we could do something like array I, right? So it'll get us to the first 10 values through that array. It loops through that. This is a very common construction in lots of different languages, right? Everybody's got a for loop. With Ruby, because looping through arrays and hashes and other collections are so common, we have a different way of doing that where we have a method called each. So we can call array each. All right, so let's make a quick array here. Actually, I'll go ahead and create this right in the, oops, not make directory. See? Need more coffee. Touch blocks.rb. Okay, so we can make an array in here. And now I got to like shift the brain cells around from JavaScript into Ruby again, right? So we could do something like animals. And again, we can do this shorthand. One thing I remembered, this is my style preference, is to use curly braces with this shorthand for arrays. But you can use any opening and closing punctuation that you like. So if you want to, you could create an array with parentheses. You can create it with square braces. You can even do this if you want. You can use some other punctuation mark. All right? So we can do cat, dog, bird, fish, dolphin. And we can even do pit, bull, if we escape that space with, again, a backslash. That'll allow us to create an array. Let's check this on herb before we save this in our file. Right? Right? So we get that shorthand thing where the common usage is that it will create each of those items into a single word. If we didn't have that slash before the space between pit and bull, we would have two array items, one called pit, one called bull, which of course is two totally different animals, right? Okay, so we get that nice little thing. All right, so to iterate through this, right, so let's refresh our memory. If we want to get the first item out of an array, we call animals 0, which will be cat. If we want the second one, we call animals 1, we get dog. So if we want to programmatically do this, to count through these things. In JavaScript, again, we would use something like a for loop. In Ruby, we do something a little bit different. We do animals.each. And then we have this interesting construction where we say do, and then we pass a variable. Here we get to use another new fancy piece of punctuation, which is our pipe, right? That's over in the New York State area of the keyboard, right? So we see animals each, and now we're in a block. So this is similar to when we pass an argument to a method, right? But now we're passing a block. And a block is just any arbitrary code, really, that Ruby can execute. So we can do each animal, and then we can do something like puts animal end. And this is what we get. It races through, puts cat, dog, bird, fish, dolphin, pit, bull, TK. How are you doing? No, I was greeting you. You just happened to come at the end of the list. TK is not an animal.
Why was the array as the last thing returned? Why was that evaluated last? I don't understand. Shouldn't it be the last element or empty or something?
That is a really good question, Tyrone.
That's why I like explicit returns, because these last evaluated thing that's so Ruby dependent.
Right. Well, so what is being returned there is the array itself, which probably makes sense because we're still, this each method is still a call on that animal's object, right? So in most object-oriented programs, if you're doing something that's non-destructive, you want the object to return itself because that allows you to do things like chain methods, right? We couldn't do animals, reverse, I think we can do reverse upcase. We can't do upcase on there. We'd have to do that. Let's go to the Ruby documentation. Let's look for some method or arrays on methods on arrays, right? You can, yeah, for sure. I'm looking for something that's a little bit cleaner, right? All right, so we've got our different array construction, different ways of accessing arrays. Let's see. Okay, so we can do something like shuffle, where it'll shuffle our array, right? We can do animals.shuffle, right? And now, okay, so we'll get a random thing. So we could do something, we'll have to take it on faith that we could do animals.shuffle.reverse. So it'll shuffle the array and then reverse whatever it is. The reason that we can chain methods like this is because shuffle returns an instance of itself, and then reverse returns an instance of itself. So even when we do something like a block up here, all right, let's do that. See if I can scroll back to that. Now we're just going to have to type it again, right? Each do animal puts animal end, right? So it makes sense. Because what's the other option here of what this could return? What does puts always return? Right. So your other option here is to have, however many members there are in the array, have that many nil values returned, which isn't really useful. So while it's surprising that this is returned, it actually, or it might be surprising, it makes sense that that's why it would do that. And of course, remember that we're in herb, right? It's not like when you're building a Rails app or a command line application or whatever else that you're doing that you're suddenly going to have this string appear on the screen. This is herb saying, hey, this is what's returned from this thing. Ordinarily, in most contexts, it would run and you'd never know the difference. Right? Let's prove that. Here's our animals thing. Let's do animals each do animal. And by the way, this is another kind of Rubyism, right? You would, in JavaScript and things like that, we would do something like each do A or each do M, like array or member or something right like this. Ruby is very fond of variables that are explicit in terms of what they represent. So animals each do animal, puts the individual animal, end. Okay? So if I want to, I can call Ruby and then pass it my blocks.rb file. Where did that come from? Oh, animals each do animal. I think that's Adam getting a little overeager and pluralizing it because I used it like that once. Okay, so here, this is our program, right? And it does exactly what we tell it to. There's no evidence of what was returned after that function ran, right? Right, yeah. Herb is meant to help you inspect Ruby code or to run little bits of things. When we get into Rails next week, Rails has its own console program, which is one of my favorite things that I love about Rails. So it allows you to load up your entire web application, but inspect it class by class, method by method, basically do herb-like things, but with the whole Rails app loaded up into your terminal, right? Which is great for hunting down weird errors and stuff like that.
So is this each loop just doing the same thing as direct indexing, but just abstracting that away from us?
Yes. Okay. Yeah. It would be the same thing as like doing a numeric race through whatever the loop is, but here we're just using this particular iterator method. Okay? And of course, we can do this similar thing with hashes too. we could do something like musical instruments. And we can do, let's just do a straight up hash literal for this. So we could do something like flute, say woodwind, and trumpet, brass, and what do we got? Violin is equal to string, right? And we can clean this up, make it a little bit more readable. Right? I believe Ruby will let me put that down there, almost JavaScript-like. Let's test it. So Ruby blocks, didn't like it. Oh, that's right. I'm totally JavaScripting this up this morning. Flute! You guys got to stop me when I'm doing stupid things.
Well, there's like 3 different syntaxes, so I thought maybe you knew another one.
Right, yeah. No, this was basic stupidity syntax. There we go. All right, one more time. Okay, so it'll do that exactly what we would expect. And now if I go fire up herb, right, I can call on my musical instrument. Oh, I got to load it. Thank you, Tyrone. Boy, it's going to be a long morning. There we go. All right, seeing it ran, anything that is in that file is going to get run. But now we should have our musical instruments. My life for tab completion like that. Why didn't that work? Come on, Stolly, get it together here, buddy.
The file saved?
It should be. It might be freaking out about, I don't know why it would freak out. No, there we go. Did I just spell musical instruments wrong? Yeah, but I thought this one was correct. Instruments. Huh. Well, we got it now. So we can do the same thing. We can do the same each iterator with our musical instruments. Each, do, and now we get what in other languages we would say is the key and the value, right? Let me clear this out so we can see better what I'm doing here. So we can do musical instruments. Each, do. Now, most languages would do something like key and value, which of course doesn't tell us anything at all. So what we would ordinarily want to do is to say, right, instrument and family, because that's what I've got in my hash there. And then I can do something like puts, and let's just do a nice interpolated string here. Instrument is in the family. Flute is in the woodwind family. Trumpet is in the brass family. Violin is in the string family. Okay. So even though we used symbols on that wacky hash that didn't want to behave, symbol itself has a toString method, right? We could do something like random symbol to S. And then we will get the string representation of random symbol, just like that. Now, and we'll see this in that style guide later, but this is an interesting little Ruby stylistic thing. Where's herb? If, and actually let's move this whole thing into herb where we can preserve it, right? We can do musical instruments, each, do, instrument, thank you, instrument, family. Now that order does matter, right? We're the only ones who know that instrument refers to the key or to the symbols, and the family refers to that second thing. So the order matters there, all right? And let me just copy this string over from herb, so I don't have to type that all again. All right. Now, if I'm only interested in the values, right? There's plenty of times where we might. What are you doing to me, Apple? I never use calendar on Apple. It's like, hey, would you like to use your? Yes, I would. Thank you. This is an opportune moment. Now, we might have a case where we've got hashes where we don't care about what the keys are. Those are just for us as programmers. So if we wanted to do that, we would do musical instruments each do, and then we would treat the key variable as an underscore. That's the little programmer signal of like we're going through a hashed collection here, but we're not going to worry about the keys of this thing at all. So we could do family like that. All right, and then we can just say puts, what do we want to do? Family is a group of instruments in the orchestra. Woodwind, brass, and string. Okay. It's going to be grammatically correct. That's the main thing, right? So let me exit from herb here. We'll call Ruby, and we'll pass it our blocks file. So there's our array run through. Here's our keyed in value in here where we're just running through the value of that particular hash. Woodwind is a group of instruments.
If you're not accessing the key, is it using the underscore, is that any more efficient for runtime, or is it more of a readability convention that, hey, I'm not touching the key, that's why I put the underscore?
That's generally, it's a readability thing. This is basically saying I'm aware that there has to be this. Because let's see what happens if we just try to do family, right? We just try to pass one argument here. We should get an error. Okay. So it tried to accommodate us, and what it did was basically give us like the gut spilling thing, right? So Ruby's trying really hard there. But obviously that is not at all what we want in this instance. So we need to put something here. And so the convention is to use an underscore if there's going to be some value passed to that block that you're not actually going to access within the block.
Can we just put a comma or remove the underscore?
I don't think so. I think that would throw a syntax error. Yeah. All right, so we do need something there. So the convention is that underscore is going to be the placeholder there. All right. We put some comments in here. So hash passed to a block using both key and value. Hash passed to a block using only value. All right. So we've got that stuff. Let me tell you what. It occurs to me that maybe if I didn't have this dark, brooding Gesundheit theme, that maybe you'd be able to see what I'm doing easier.
It burns.
It burns, but maybe it'll be easier to see.
I don't like it.
You don't like it?
I don't like white. No.
You like it with the dark better? Do we want to put it to a vote? It looks good on the video at home to do it dark. All right, we'll do it dark. I wouldn't want it to get too bright in here.
Yeah.
I'm kind of with you.
They name some IDs name it Dracula theme. It's all dark. Yeah.
I'm not concerned about how it looks. I'm concerned about what's most visible to you sitting in this room right now, if it's dark or light. Okay. 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 All right, so that's blocks. I think that's all I want to say about blocks for right now.
Anything about iterators?
About what?
Iterators?
Iterators? Well,
Is there a specific construct?
each is an iterator. If we go, let's go look at the documentation again, which something is amiss here.
Because I'm just, if it was an iterator, I would think it would say not value. You have to, like it's an iterator, so hence you'd have to access its value to get the actual text. But we were able to directly access the text. That's why I'm wondering where the iterator object is.
So again, that's all, and technically if you look in the Ruby core, each is implemented with a for loop behind the scenes. Okay, so the way that that works, that's actually a really good question, Tyrone. So you're right, we're able to access on both of these cases, right? Let's do the array case because that's the simpler one. So what we're saying with this iterator method, when we say each, is we're saying grab each item in this array. But it works similar to a loop, right? Because on the first pass through each, we're grabbing one. I mean, this isn't the way that it's actually executed, but conceptually, this is maybe easier to get your head around it, right? So we say take each element, and then we give it effectively a local variable that is scoped, right? We haven't talked much about scope yet, but it's scoped to this block. So if I tried to call animal, right, outside of this block, if I say puts animal, okay, undefined local variable or method animal for main object. Okay, so animal as a thing in the program is local to this block, and it only is around for the life of that particular block. Once it's done executing, that's it for animal. It disappears. Okay? And here, again, this has to do with the way that this, let's go to our hash object. And we can find this each. Right? So we're seeing the old programmer each key value block, just like that. Which, by the way, we could do this even, let's see, each key. So we can do, if we wanted to, we could just loop through each key from our, that's another valid iterator method. Let's try this one so I can show you this other syntax. So I'm actually doing, this is a slight Ruby sin to do the do end syntax when we have a single line. What is more conventional when you have a very simple block is you would do animals each, and then you would do animal puts animal, right? Like that. It's more common to have more complex blocks, so that's why I don't feel terrible as an instructor to go through that one. But here we can do, right? So here, instead of going through family, well, let's just do the instruments, right? We can do. Oh, that's true. There's that particular method. Where are we at? Each pair, each value, right? So we could simplify this, which would probably make more sense than using this little underscore hack, right? Each value do family. And then let's do the other ones so that we can see. Hold on, let me. This is where I want to make sure I preserve this stuff for everyone that's at home later. Let's make a commit. Okay. So we can do here each value do family. We'll just grab this thing. And the each value iterator. And here we can do each key instrument. And again, we're saying instrument here, not key. There's nothing wrong with saying key, but we want to be clear what we expect to come out of this, and we can say instrument is a noisemaker in the orchestra, right? Okay, so if we again run Ruby blocks RB, right? So here's our each key Should be putting in some more comments and things like that. But then here is our, or rather each value here and then each key here. Examples of each key, each key iterators. Yeah, that's the great thing about the documentation is to go through and see what all kinds of interesting things. So yeah, we get an each pair, right? That's a good question.
Because when you did just one word, it gave you a pair, right?
Yeah.
And using each, so I'm just curious why they would have. Because the whole concept was don't repeat yourself, and it seems.
Yeah, it's interesting here because the example just uses each. So it's entirely possible. Each pair is an enumerator. Blocks. So if we do musical instruments, each pair. That's so weird that it's not hanging on to those variables to get loaded up. I feel like I must be doing something terribly wrong. That's okay. Grab these things. Right. And it might have to do with the scoping of it. If I used an instance variable within main, it might hang on to that better. So let's see. So if we do... Okay, so it will return that enumerator each pair. Instrument family, right? Then we can do puts. Thank you. Each pair do, right? Puts, and then again we'll use our interpolated strings here. Instrument is a family, right? So at least on the surface, it looks like those two are the same. Let's see what happens if we call each without a block. Yeah, each returns the same thing. So it's possible that that might just be an aliased method. Because at least on the surface, they're both returning enumerators without an argument. Yeah. Just like that. Right. Questions? Your computer's being what? Oh, stupid. Oh, that's never any good. Okay. Why don't we take a quick break? I want to dive into the documentation stuff, but we'll do 2 breaks today. What do you say? 5 minutes now, and 5 minutes again in another hour or something, unless we really get cooking with Sinatra. What's that? I can. And I can hang out today after class, too, if you want to deal with some stuff then.
So it's getting in the game right now, because what happened was, I don't know how I got that on Windows, but after furiously typing and doing some other things, I got back to my Windows, but then I wasn't able to get back to my Ubuntu, so I figured I could just delete the whole launcher and then start over, right? However, when I did that, reallocated and everything, and put it all back together. But when I'm trying to reseparate it to do like a fresh start, it won't let me do that, which is now what I'm doing right now. It's
Yikes. So you're in. So you tried reinstalling Windows then?
Yes, I did
Okay.
that last night and
Okay.
this morning,
Okay.
and I'm just sitting here like, you just hate me.
Yeah. So how long has it been sitting there scanning C drive at 58%?
5 minutes. So like when I got here, it was just finishing up the restart,
Okay.
and then I tried to do it again. It said use checklist
Mm-hmm.
in the command line, which I did, and then it was still giving me issues. So then I was like, okay, I'll just scan on period, so it's giving me this right.
Okay. I had a serious case of deja vu just that second. That was really weird.
I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. It happens to me on occasion. Let's wait. Sit. As long as it's doing that, we don't want to really disrupt it. I don't want to break anything.
I think I already broke it.
The weekly productions work. What is that?
I'm going to talk about that. Can you ask that when
Okay.
we're back?
Is it like for 363 or one?
Similar, but it's all based on the stuff in the books that you're reading.
Okay.
So I ended up getting the book, even though it's free. And it was like, let me support the author. Because I actually read the reviews and skimmed through the book before I was buying it. It's pretty good.
Nice.
So and then I trust Carl to kind of give us books that are not, gonna break your bank.
Especially since you made me do this whole lecture on how he does finds the books.
Yeah. But I'm curious because I'll always try to look for books, but most of the time, like, how do I that? And he reads a lot of books.
He writes his own books.
Yeah, he wrote his own book, which he does not like the title of, but
He's a bit of a nerd.
Wait, what?
he wrote his own book.
No, if you wrote the book, why is it not like the title?
Because the publisher picked it.
Ah.
How to write web pages today. Ask him about it. He might have some thoughts. I like it.
Knowing his personality, I'm kind of surprised he didn't go the self-published route.
Well,
Knowing his personality, I'm half surprised he didn't go the self-published route.
I understand, but you gotta make money somehow.
Have all the students buy it
Sorry.
from the direct.
He's so
I
funny.
have Encyclopedia back in
For me?
Canada.
Yeah.
Yes, Encyclopedia actually did find it. It was about the same problem.
So what happened to your
Books in this style.
So, I've been meaning to move my laptop for quite some time. Because I figure with Linux and with the security classes that I've been taking, it'd be great to just have it on my laptop, right? So, this FE system that they've been using as of late since like Windows 8, 8.1, it doesn't really play well
Yeah.
during booting. So you have to put in the legacy options, right? So I put in the legacy option, and then I got the Ubuntu to work. However, the Windows partition stopped working. That was really fun. And then when I got the Windows partition to work after, I don't know what I did. I just know it worked again, and I was like, cool. So I was like, since I'm in Windows and this is my main system, I'm gonna wipe the Linux system and then start over, right?
Yeah.
So I tried to do that. Had to get back into the FE system, which was great. It was wonderful. Good time. And like, I don't know. I did something, it broke, and now I'm repairing stuff. So
Yeah, usually if I came out to boot is not exactly recommended for the painter part.
Is that the same thing as
It used to be
virtual
easy.
bots?
It used to be very easy and very fun.
Yeah.
Everyone
Yes,
did
no.
it.
Yeah.
yeah,
So
so
with
like
you, if I'm
virtual
like,
bots, you don't
forget
have
this.
as much.
It's at least for you, I was successful in doing it when I installed it in a certain order. So as long as you installed it with Linux first and then Windows, like Rob took care of it automatically. But the Windows bootloader is not able to do that.
Yeah.
I know.
To me, it just
Good, you got
feels
your
like I
problem
don't
fixed.
have
Oh,
the same
thank you.
power I would have with my first one.
If not, I was gonna recommend another
Does that make sense? 'Cause I
Yeah.
had
Ruby
to get my
manager.
hard drive.
Yeah,
If
no,
you can get it
I
fixed.
ended up having to do it. Like,
Oh, okay.
So,
I totally
I was
screwed up
using
the
my
systems. I ended up kind of
only
wiping it.
intense hard drive.
Oh, you wiped
hard
your
drive,
system?
hard
Oh, okay.
drive.
There was
Instead
nothing
of like
really on
a
it
soft
anyway.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah,
hard
yeah.
drive.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
So
Cause
if you
Easiest way
have
to do it.
Honestly, in
have
the 6-week
more power.
class, I wouldn't want to waste time troubleshooting my computer. I
No.
want to just work on it.
That's-
Yeah.
easy to do
Yeah,
shit like
but
that.
last night
It-
about
it wasn't
8:50
hard at
when I
all.
was looking at like
Harder
really
But
this
no,
week
Windows
in
is just
class
like, I'm
and
gonna
being
do
out
this.
for 6
Yeah. Damn.
Fuck you,
So basically, well,
No, I thought we were forking.
so
So we're forking it, yeah.
okay, so two. For the projects, you create your own repo and share the link with him. And then for the weekly production, he has not created it. He told me to ask the question again when it's live.
That's what I thought.
Because yesterday I tried forking it and it wasn't there, like it didn't exist. So
Windows partition is still there.
okay, no, because all he has
It
to
was
find
just
any
reading
weekly
the
work yet.
wrong
So
partition. And I didn't know how to change.
I'm guessing he said it's stuff from the book. So
It's, I think it's like chapters 1 through 15.
wow, that's a lot to do.
It is a lot.
Oh, okay.
The first like 8 chapters,
Are-
you'll probably
Because
just
it takes
breeze
up so
through.
much
Are there
time.
exercises or?
Exactly. That's
Yeah,
why
there's
I
exercises
had it,
for
but
the
then
whole
I
thing.
think
And
I
the- and
deleted
at the
it,
end of
but
each
like
chapter?
when I look in
No,
my
it's like
files, like
through
it
it, you
still
just kind
shows
of
up.
follow along.
So I don't know
The
if I
virtual
like.
box is actually, I feel like it's by itself.
Oh, that
Yeah.
way.
It doesn't go.
Well,
Yeah,
I was.
it won't go away.
Well, he'll talk about it when it's live. So.
But
The production model.
Yes. So my grand plan failed, which was to put together the repository for that together last night, so that you could all fork it, so I'd be able to easily check your work. But what you'll do between now or this afternoon when I get that thing posted, and Tuesdays, I want you to go through the Tarun, hold up. The Learn Your Program book in print or electronic form, however you've got it, and actually write all the exercises in the book. I'm also going to give you, there's like enrichment exercises. I'm going to let you pick a couple of those to do. Oh, thank you. Sorry. I'm an idiot. They are watching me, right? They're watching me?
Here, I don't see. Okay, I'll ask the question so we start officially.
Yeah, so we can start officially. So, Tarun, did you have... Damn it. All right. Camera, he's ready. Thank you. All right, here we go. Tarun, yes, you had a question.
Yes. What about that weekly production work?
So the weekly production work. So what I'm going to ask you to do is to get in the habit of writing out the exercises in the book. It can be kind of rote and boring in parts, but it's one of the ways that I find is really useful for learning a new programming language and using Git along with it. So I'd planned to have the repository for that for you to fork this afternoon, or actually yesterday afternoon. I'll have it up this afternoon. But basically, you'll go through the code examples in the Pine book between now and Tuesday, and then starting next week, we'll do the Rails development stuff. And I'll have slightly different instructions for that. But basically, I'll just say, make a folder called Pine. I'll actually have it made for you. And then just make chapter 1, well, not 1, but chapter 2 and through 7, and then 8 through 15. And then I'll ask you to pick a couple of the enrichment exercises. Your choice. They're always at the end of chapters. So like there's one at the end of the numerals chapter about like doing Roman numerals. What's the header there? A few things to try, right?
Yeah,
Those are the end of every single chapter. A few things to try, right? So I'll have that explicitly in there, and then just try a couple of them. There are like possible solutions to them at the back of the book, so you'll be able to check your work, right? So it's meant to make sure that you're doing more than just kind of like looking at the page, that you're actually engaging in it, even if it's just the rote thing of kind of doing what's in the book. And of course, enrich yourself, make changes, adjustments, and try to figure that stuff out.
For the things that are in the book that we follow along, that we type in herb, you just want us to put in a file then, or?
If for the stuff that's in early chapters that's in herb, you can make your own judgment call about that. But as the book goes on, the scripts get more complex, and you'll want to learn to write that stuff down. All right, so I'll have a little README file on that. They'll have full instructions this afternoon. Yes, Dean?
One thing with Ruby I've noticed, I never seen like the comment symbol.
The comment symbol?
Yeah, in program there's always like to know what is human readable, or is Ruby just supposed to be so human readable that it's not needed?
Well, I'm going to close this door. That is an interesting case for Ruby, is that it's meant to be written as a literate language, right? So comments are usually only there if you're going to try to save somebody from some kind of trouble. I mean, this is one of the great things about open source, right? Let's go into, let's see if I do which Ruby it'll tell me, here's where I've got these shims that point to my Ruby. But if I go into my, and let me open up a new tab for this. If I go into RB environment, and then into, where are we at? Not bind, not bin, versions, and then there's 2.41, right? And if I go into lib and into Ruby and into 2.4.0, I think is where that stuff is all at. Okay. So this is these are all the core classes and everything inside of Ruby. Although this is not, because that doesn't have array in it. That's not it either. It's been a while since I've dug into the darn. Usually I'm into the gem files. Let's look at a gem, because I know where those are. I'll fix this later. All right. So if I go into gems, all right, so Rails, what the heck, right? We'll look at this next week. Oh, come on. What is going on? Why can't I find my source code anywhere? Good Lord.
You know what Brian would say?
Who would say?
Brian.
Well, oh, I can just imagine. Right, here we go. So here's all of our, so we can just open something like Atom application RB. Right? So we'll see here is a whole bunch of require statements, right? So here are the different modules and classes that are being loaded up. And then you can see, so here's the opening comments for Rails, and we're using just the hash syntax, right? There's not a lot of complex things here, and it explains what the purpose is of this, what its initialization is. And of course, this uses something called RDoc syntax, so that they're able to write all the documentation in the modules and classes. And then so what we see at rubydocs.org, for example, is derived from the documentation that's right inside of the classes. If you're really interested in that, I can definitely set aside half an hour, 45 minutes someday in the next couple of weeks to talk about documenting classes that style. All right. And then we can see all of the things of how this stuff works, right? And if I had a little bit more coffee in me, we'd find similar things for all of our classes in Rails and things like that, our arrays and hashes and everything else. All right. I do want to talk about modules versus classes, but I'm going to save that until we're actually into Rails next week and we start seeing that syntax. Okay, so is that good? Are we cool? All right. Not a lot of intense style on the comments in Ruby. Okay, so I've pointed to Ruby docs, right, and used it today and got frustrated and mad. But I'm telling you, the site for all your documentation needs is devdocs.io. And what's awesome about this is it allows you to install documentation that gets cached in your browser for offline use. What's even better with that offline stuff, so even if Isabel's like, I'm never leaving the city limits or the comfort of my Wi-Fi, that's fine, Isabel. When you've got a local copy of all the documentation on your browser, search is instantaneous because you don't have to pass the search over to across the internet and then download the results and things like that. So pick your favorite hipster framework, right? Angular, and I don't even know what Apache Pig is, but it's there. Bootstrap, C, all of these are the documentation sets that we can get. There's an entire Git documentation set here. Right? I can say enable that thing, so now it's going to hold on to all the Git documentation for me. Look, there's Fortran. Somebody built a web frame. This was, I think I posted, or somebody posted it to OpenIIT about Fortran has now its own web development framework, which is screwed up. I believe it. So if we keep going down to the others, Node.js, right? If I want to, I can grab that. And if I keep going further, Ruby. And there's 2.4, 2.3, and 2.2. We're going to be using 2.4 in here, so I'm going to enable the doc set for that, right? So now, if I search on array, and of course, the more document sets you have, the more results you're going to get. But there is my array class from Ruby, right? And now we get a much, to my opinion, cleaner and even, that's not totally responsive. They must load up a different thing. But you can use this on your phone. I've got the dev docs sets on my iPhone, right? Because you just never know when you're at a party or something, you need to look up the methods of the hash class to impress your friends or settle an argument, right? So we've got our class here. And again, these are important things to start to learn to read. Like it's telling us that the parent class of the array is an object and that it includes the enumerable modules. Do we want to talk about classes and modules right now? Okay. I brought it up. Now we got to talk about it, right? So here's where Herb can get instructive. Okay, let's get out of here. All right. Okay, so class, the class of class is class, all right? And if we do module class, also class, okay? So modules and classes are both classes. And there are a number of things that are different between these two. But the biggest difference between a module and a class in Ruby is that when we do a class, right, or specifically when we create a class, like if we say class car end, from that we get the ability to say car new, okay? A class can be used to create instances of other objects. A module yes. A module does not give us, there's no new syntax with a module. Okay? So we can include module methods. So if we wanted to return, and I'm not going to go this deep, although maybe I should. If we wanted to, we could do a module called vehicle. And we might have methods in that module like accelerate. Right? And then in our car class, we could say include vehicle. So by doing that, our car would know how to accelerate. So that means we could also create a class of boat and a class of motorcycle and a class of go-kart and whatever else we wanted to do. So here we would just kind of create these higher level methods that any kind of transportation, any kind of vehicle would know about. All right? Now, what's even weirder about Ruby, and this is where things go completely off the rails, is you can define classes inside of modules if you want to. Okay? But just because you're creating the class inside a module, this would not, so if we had that def, I don't know, if we had start, let's say, I just pick out start because it's short to write. Even though I'm creating this definition inside a vehicle, does not mean that car is going to know about it. We still have to include the vehicle module inside a class, even though the class is defined inside of the module. So let me write some code. Let's write some code. Everybody likes to write some code. All right, so let's exit from this. Thank you. Wow. So let's do this. Let's just grab our car from yesterday. Right? And this time I'm going to create a module called vehicle. And I'm going to take these brake and accelerate. Both of those things are, I don't know, does one brake a boat? There's not really brakes in a boat. If you've ever driven a boat before, you just basically stop the engine and hope you slow down. All right, but let's, for the sake of argument, so we're going to put all of these methods inside of this vehicle module. All right? And I'm going to just add some nonsense. You are now going blah, 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 miles per hour from a module so that we can all agree that when I drop in this module here that we know that we're actually pulling in methods from this module here. So
How does it know about the instance variable speed?
that's a good question too, and we're going to find that out here real quick, aren't we? So if I do herb f load module, okay, so now I can try to do car is equal to car new. Let's start doing these the Ruby way, right? Car speed, so I'm going to use one of those attribute accessors. It's 0. Car accelerate. There it is. Okay. So again, what is the acronym that we love in Ruby? Starts with D, rhymes with rye. Dry. Right? So rather than defining, if we know that we're creating an app that's going to have a whole bunch of different vehicles in it, or we're creating a game or something like that. Acceleration, even in this sad little 1 mile per hour increments, we would obviously want some physics, we'd want some curves, we'd want some, some things that model the real world, but for our basic 1986 car driving game where we can accelerate by tapping the B button on the controller really fast, right? I still think those of us who grew up in the late 80s and 90s with our Nintendos are going to have some late onset arthritis in our thumbs that they're going to trace back to the Nintendo controller. There's going to be a big class action lawsuit. I'll be able to retire to some island someplace for all those hours smashing the buttons on the controller. But if we know that we're going to be dealing with lots of vehicular things, we can do this vehicle module and put all of our speed up, slow down, what direction are you going, how much fuel do you have left, all these different kinds of things. And then we can just create the specific things here. And of course, it might be this, we still need an initializer, right, that has a make for our car vehicle. And of course, we can also override those methods. So if we decide our how fast method is for the car, puts this car is broken, it can't move, right? Just as an example, right? So we have our how fast up here. This is how we expect it to be, but we can say, oh, the car is going to have a different how fast method here. Okay, so we can do nothing. Car is equal to car new, Chevy, right? And now we say car how fast, and we get this car is broken, it can't move. So you're allowed to jump in and modify those things. And another point that I didn't talk about as much yesterday, but again, Ruby is a dynamic language, right? These classes, we can open them up at any time, right? If we want to do class car and define a method called hyperspace, puts you have made the jump to hyperspace, right? So I've just reopened this class. Let's close it all the way, right? We need the one end for the method. I've just opened up the car class. I've created a new method on it to jump to hyperspace. But not only has the class changed, but my car instance. Boom, I've made the jump to hyperspace. So even at runtime, you can go in, modify the contents of a class, and not only does the class change, but all instances of that class also get the new methods or the changed methods or anything like that, right? Which is why you have to be really organized in Ruby. Which is why you don't want to repeat yourself in Ruby unless you're doing something like we are with this module where we're making the car run differently. Okay, one other thing, since we're deep into it with modules.
How does it know about speed? What I still don't understand. How does vehicle, the module, know about the instance variable speed?
Well, that's a good question. I don't have a good answer for you. I want to see what happens if I try to create an instance variable out here like height and do plus equals 1. Okay, so it's giving me an undefined method for that nil class. So I don't know. We would have to look at how the Ruby interpreter is comfortable having an instance variable like that inside of a method definition. My gut instinct, without any evidence other than my experience writing in this language, is that this is such a common pattern where you have particular kinds of methods. And if you have particular kinds of methods, you would probably expect also to have similar kinds of instance variables, right? Notice that our one variable that we create at the moment that we instantiate a object from this, the one instance variable that we pass in is make. You'll notice that there is no reference to make up here, which means that that variable is something that's unique to our car. So again, just as we're saying these methods are shared across any objects that we create, we would also probably expect that these instance variables. Because again, what would the opposite thing do? I don't know. We might be able to set the instance variables on the module, right? We could do a whole bunch of speed 0. I guess that's the only one we've got here. But that's not a Ruby-like thing in this context, right? That's the kind of ceremonial thing, like, oh, we must declare up top our instance variables and we must set them to a value. Ruby is just going to say, okay, go ahead and put those instance variables in there. And of course, if we had the kind of thing, right, let's try and break this. Let's get rid of this speed instance on our class, right? This should cause bad things to happen, I would imagine, right? So exit, and we'll run herb again. We'll load our module. Okay, so car speed is nil. Okay, there we go. So when it actually comes time to run the method, we've got a nil value for this instance variable. Now, you'll notice that even though I got rid of the instance variable on the class, I still have my attribute accessor right up here. So the question becomes, what if I say car.speed is equal to 0? So now I'm saying, here's speed for you. You gave me this accessor method. Now what happens when I call car accelerate? Okay, it's broken, it can't move. But we now know that we're not getting complaints about our methods here. You okay, Dean?
What's going on?
Yeah, it sounds like the world's ending out there. Let's hope it's not.
Can we move a vehicle to another file?
You can. And that's actually the next thing. So should have been making commits all the way along here. Okay, so let's make a commit. What's that?
Good old Git.
Yep. So one of the reasons that people like to use modules, even if they don't have a set of methods that they're including, if we have a class like car and we're requiring a bunch of different Ruby gems, it's entirely possible, especially if we're creating an app in the realm of vehicles and things like that, that somebody else might have a class named car. So if we do this, which is to nest our car class inside of the module vehicle, we've now done what's known as namespacing our car class, right? Which means some interesting things happen. So let's do herb. We'll load up our module. So now if I try to create a new car, uninitialized constant for car, okay? It can't find my car class because it's nested inside of this module. So we have to use a special syntax, a syntax that I love. I use it all over the place, like on my to-do lists, like when my wife is coming and going, I'll say Amy, and then colon, colon, and then wherever she's going or wherever she's coming to. So we do car. So now we can say vehicle, colon, colon, car new. So what we're saying is go and find our vehicle module, or it's even more abstract than that. Go and find the constant named vehicle, and then find the car class within inside of that, and then create a new Ford. Okay, so now we've got it, and now we're back in business, and that's as much as our life changes. If I want to say car speed, it will tell me. If I want to say car brake, tell me that it's broken, it can't move. That's cool. All right, is that cool? Oh, that's right, because it's the how fast is the method that I changed in the car. Let me get rid of that method because that's kind of annoying me now. Yeah, it's still holding on to that old method definition. But so that's used to namespace things. Now, to make things even weirder, if we decided we would like to be able to create some kind of abstract vehicle, right? With this module, I cannot call. Let me just prove what I said to you earlier. If I go herb F, load up my module again, I cannot say, I don't know, X-wing is equal to vehicle new, right? So there's this undefined method new for vehicle module, okay? Which makes us sad. But if I wanted to, I could change vehicle from a module to a class. And let's go back out and talk about ceremony. Module RB. And now I can say, wrong type class expected module. So that breaks this because now I can't include vehicle anymore. What I can do is say car inherits from vehicle. That's the other syntax. So we can include a module's methods, or we can say the car is going to inherit from the vehicle class. You can nest classes within other classes. The interesting thing about nested classes is that even though we say class vehicle out here and class car in here, in some languages, by virtue of the fact that you've nested this class inside a vehicle, it would know about all the outer classes variables. Ruby gives you a syntax, and you don't even, around a good serious Rubyist, you don't even want to talk about nested classes because there's nothing nested about them. They're just held inside of the same thing. But what we can do, if we do want to make it aware of that other objects or other classes methods, is we would use this operator here to say you will inherit methods from vehicle. Let's see if that's enough to make this happy. Okay, superclass mismatch for class car. Yeah, I'm in the weeds here. There's probably some silly thing that I'm forgetting about.
I think if you move car out, that makes sense.
Yeah, there is a way to define classes within inside classes like that. It's escaping me. It's not a common practice. You'll see it done, but generally speaking, this is the syntax that you want to use. Even if your module doesn't have methods, right? So we could get rid of this stuff and we could have class boat, right? So this way, every time we want to create a new boat, we say vehicle boat, or we say car boat, or vehicle car, right, to do this kind of thing. There is a syntax that we can use that, but I forget what it is.
So I guess
you can research it later.
Getting too big, you can make a different file
That's right.
Car, and then you can just say require within this module those classes, right?
Exactly. So, and let's show how that. Well, first of all, let me get this thing sorted out again so we can make a darn commit. Okay, so there's our car inside of this thing. Forget where we were. Okay, added the module in vehicle class from yesterday. Okay, so let's change this thing back to a module. Right. We want to include vehicle here. Yeah. Okay, yeah, so the difference here is that we've put car inside of this module. Okay, good. So let's make a commit. Placed car class inside of module of vehicle module. Okay, yeah. So we could do this. This would be a very Ruby-like thing to do. I'm going to just copy this so that module thing is there. So I'm going to copy module RB to car.rb. And I'm also going to copy module RB to boat RB, let's say. Okay, so what I might have here in, let's close out some of this cruft. What is happening here? I did some bad things. Okay, so module vehicle. Oh yeah, that's true. We would probably even do that. So let's module RB to vehicle.rb. Okay, so we would have our vehicle. I'm screwed up here. Okay, so here's vehicle, the module, and all we're going to do in that file is open the module, put all of our module methods here that are going to get shared across our different classes. Okay. Then if I look at car, I'm going to get rid of these things because they're in the other file now. So I can say module vehicle class car, just like that. And then
Why would you redefine the module?
you're not redefining it. You are opening it.
Ah, okay.
Okay.
Opening it, right?
So then we can say class boat end, right? I won't bother defining that thing. But now what we can do is we can, in something like herb, let's not do, nobody wants to, well, let's do it. So decisive today, right? So we can do require vehicle.rb. Am I in the wrong directory? Oh, that's right. If I'm going to do require statements, I've got to use the / syntax in herb here. So require vehicle.rb. Then I can require, and of course these would be lines within my Ruby file. Then I can say car.rb, and I can require, spell it correctly, I can require boat.rb, or not. If I decide in this particular file or this particular part of my program, all I need is vehicles methods and the car, then I can ignore boat, right?
Did we need to require vehicle because car includes vehicle, right? So when did that import?
If we only do, let's do it. Well, let me show this off. So if we say car is equal to vehicle, car, new, Buick. I'm back to that old, we'll do Buick here. Right? And now I can do car, how fast. Okay, and I can do car, accelerate. Right, so I'm getting all these things. If I load up herb and I require only car.rb, if I do car is equal to vehicle car new, okay, and if I ask it about things like how fast, undefined method, right? Even though it's in the same module, Ruby only knows about the files that we tell it about. It doesn't go searching around elsewhere and say, oh, what about this file? Does it have vehicle in it? What about this file? Does it have vehicle in it?
Can I see car real quick?
Yes.
Car.
Mm-hmm. Now, if we wanted to, we could put at the very top of this thing, we could do something like require vehicle.rb. But then again, that's not a dry practice.
I don't get the point of doing the include vehicle then. Because it seems like if you remove the include vehicle, it should work the same way. As long as you require vehicle.rb and then do car.
In this case, what include vehicle means is it's going to just include what's defined in this particular module here.
Where?
What you're looking at. This module definition that includes only the car class.
Right, and my understanding is that when we load vehicle.rb, it loads all those functions.
Yes.
When we load car.rb, it appends the class car into the vehicle module. Correct?
Yes.
Yes, and then I guess I still don't understand what's the purpose of the include there.
What the include does is to say, once you have assembled the entire vehicle module, you've found it in the vehicle.rb file, you've found it in the boat.rb file, you've found it in the car.rb file, take that module and include its methods with this car class. But again, you can reason your way through it. The reason that we need to specifically include that vehicle.rb file is if that worked without including it, that means that when you fire up Ruby, it's looking through all of the files in your directory or possibly all the files in your account to try to find any instances of vehicle.rb or any of the vehicle module, which might or might not be what you want. Okay? Now, the reason for splitting this stuff up, this is not a big enough module or a big enough class to really warrant being separated into 3 different files. But once you get to be the size of something like active support in Rails or some larger gem, it doesn't make sense to write a 10,000 line Ruby file. You want to separate that stuff up into modules. So that's one of the ways that you can split code in Ruby across multiple files. You use that module as the outer sort of container in that. So, because again, when we use this module method, it's not a keyword and it's not a definition. It's a definition to Ruby the first time it encounters it. Once that thing has been encountered, then it exists, and any methods that it encounters or any variables it encounters or any classes it encounters get added to that original thing, or in the case of something where you're redefining a method or you're redefining a class, then that overrides the thing, in which case your load order matters, right?
Besides the container, I guess most of it, what we're doing, it seems like we're doing inheritance. So what's the practice? Was it using the inheritance aspect or using modules this way to kind of mimic inheritance because here these functions are the same for everybody that includes that vehicle. That's right. Module, right? Yeah. And then in inheritance, you do the same thing, and then you can override it if you wanted to. So
yes,
it just seems like a glorified container to me.
That's a module basically is a glorified container. I think that's it's a container, and it's a place that you can put shared methods. Because again, let's do this. Let's I want to put this someplace. Actually, I'm going to get rid of all of these files. Yeah, how do those things show up there? All right, so I'm going to just remove these things. Well, should I keep, first of all, let me remove these 2 like random files that suddenly showed up back in the root. I'm not sure how that happened. Okay, and so this commit will show splitting classes up, grouping them by module. Okay, but let's look at a case of inheritance here. So I think the easiest way to do this would probably be to put, let's make a copy of vehicle.rb, and we'll call this vehicle class.rb. Okay, so rather than defining vehicle class, vehicle class. Okay, so rather than defining vehicle here as a module, I'm going to define it as a class. All right, and then I'm going to go into car, and I'm going to just pull out the car class. Right, so not inside of the same container, just in the same file, and I'm going to say vehicle, like that. It should, yeah. As long as Ruby can find a constant named vehicle, and it's as long as it's a class, because it's only a class that's going to respond to this operator that indicates inheritance. Right, so let's try this again. We'll do herb f load vehicle class.rb. Thank you. Okay, so now if I say car is equal to car new, I don't know, a Bentley. Okay, so it's created this new car, and if I say car how fast, which again is defined in our vehicle class, right? Now, here's where it gets interesting. If I say car class, it's a class of car. If I say car class superclass, what do we think is going to be returned? Yes. Okay. Now, another reason that it is advantageous to put shared methods in a module rather than in a class is that classes in Ruby can only inherit from from one single other class. Right? So if we had vehicle as a class and transportation as a class, we can't inherit from both vehicle and transportation. Now we could have it so that vehicle inherits from transportation, which inherits from car, but then you start getting these really complex paths where it makes more sense to use a module because you can include it, right? You can include multiple modules into the same class. Yeah, so if we had, again, like, let's go back to our actual module definition of car, right, where we're including the vehicle. If we had something else, like include, I don't know, wheels, like we had a bunch of wheel, right? We've got something that talks about tire tread and how it wears down. We can include as many modules into a class as we want. We can only inherit from a single class. No, it's not, because multiple inheritance, when you inherit from an object, you're grabbing all of its properties and methods, and you're sharing knowledge about the object, whereas when we're including modules, we're talking more about sharing, you're right, it's semantics. It's close.
It's like how in Java you have interfaces, as opposed to in C++ you can directly inherit from multiple classes.
Right, yeah, so this gets away from that so that you don't have that more complex ancestor chain, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. Okay, let's see. Oh, that's right, this is brand new. All right. How did we go from here? We were talking about the first 4 lines of the documentation. Welcome to a Stali class. 40 minutes later. Do we want to talk about modules? Okay, we talked about it. So let's see if you caught any of that. So we say a parent object. So it inherits, right? The array class inherits from the object. This was totally worth it, wasn't it, Isabel? Array inherits from the parent, or its parent class. It inherits from object, and it includes the enumerable module. Okay, so what would we expect to see, right? Even if I can't find my crazy Ruby source because I just am not caffeinated enough, right? If we were doing our own array in, right, we decided to write our own Ruby implementation from scratch. Right, we would expect to see something like this, class array, and technically it inherits from object. Now, the default thing is when you create a class in Ruby, it inherits from object. Okay, so this is making explicit what Ruby does automatically behind the scenes, and then we would expect to see include enumerable, like that, right? That's how you would define the array object in Ruby yourself, in Ruby. Okay. And of course, we can follow some links here, like to the enumerable module, right? Which is also known when it's used in that thing. Thank you, documentation, for the vocab, right? The enumerable mix-in. So when we use, this is how it's different from inheritance, at least in terms of the Ruby terms. So when we use that include statement,
What is the mixing?
that's, so here we go, class car, include vehicle, that's a mix-in. Okay. A mix-in is just a Ruby shorthand vocab word for an included module's methods, right? Because again, we can say, oops, let's again try to parse this out. So if I go into herb again, I can say my array is equal to array new. Okay, we don't usually use the new constructor with array, but we can. Okay, and it returns empty braces. I cannot say my enumerable by saying enumerable new. Why not? It's a module, right? Does everybody else get that? Troon's like fast on the trigger today. Okay, undefined method new for enumerable modules. So we can understand a little bit about the way that the Ruby language is constructed. Array is a class, enumerable is a module, which is treated as a mix-in, because when we use this include statement followed by the name of a module, we are mixing in that module's methods to whatever class is including it, right? Or was mixing it in. So we can read the documentation here, right? This makes great beach reading for anybody headed to the beach this summer. Take your docs.io on your phone. You need to use your data plan on it, right? Numerable mixin provides collection classes, right? What did I say yesterday? Array, hash, collections, right? There's a couple other ones that we didn't hit. There's one called set, which is like an array, but it doesn't allow you to have duplicate values. There's another one called range, which allows you to specify a range of either numbers or letters. We can look at that stuff, right? But all of these enumerable methods work on collection classes. So we would expect that your array has an each method, your hash has an each method, your set has an each method, your, what was the other one? Range has an each method, right?
Would set return an error if you tried to enter in duplicate?
I don't understand what you're asking. Can you ask it one more time?
Well, if you have a set and then you try to enter in a duplicate, why can't you just check the doc tab?
Sure. Well, let's try to create one, right? My set is equal to, and we'll just do it's the same syntax, so we'll do cat, dog, bird, cat. Except we need to do set new. I think we can pass it. Why am I an uninitialized constant set? Do we have to require set? No, we do. Set is one. Okay, so here, this is such serendipity. I'm so glad that my bumbling through life is almost making up for my lack of caffeine and functioning brain today. So certain things like arrays, like enumerables, are loaded up into Ruby by default. But all we have to do is look at something like our sprawling, right, if I get rid of the search function here, look at all of these objects and classes that are in Ruby, right? And some of these things are, do we know, this is one of my favorite things in the world. We talk about, Git loves this language a lot. Porcelain functions versus plumbing functions. Okay, porcelain and plumbing. It's a toilet reference, right? You have the plumbing is the pipes in the walls that you really don't have to worry about. And then, of course, you have the porcelain bowl here up at the top, right? So some of these are porcelain methods, things like array that we're going to use directly, and others, if we look at some of these deeper command gems and things like that, those are things that may or may not be available. So if I look at set, God, every time I go in here, I just love. That's not what I want at all. This is why I just hang out with dev docs all day. Makes me so much happier. Let's find set. There we go. Okay. So set implements a collection of unordered values with no duplicates. And again, parent is object, just like an array. Included modules are enumerable, right? This is a hybrid of arrays, intuitive interoperation facilities, and hashes, fast lookup. Set is used to use. Okay, so you'll see this sometimes. Don't just skip the examples. I mean, most people just write all their code from the examples, right? Full stack overflow developer. But you'll see this in modules and classes that aren't loaded up by Ruby by default. You actually have to require them. So here we can say require set, and now we get to create this set new. Okay. I'm actually kind of surprised that that's not more obvious in the documentation. But you see from my little quick happenstance, like let's try to just require set and then do it. Okay, so here we go. So here's the syntax, right? I said my set is equal to new cat, dog, bird, cat. What gets returned to me is a set cat, dog, bird. That's it. No duplicate cat.
You also wanted to see if you add something, what would happen?
Right. So there's a few different methods. The shorthand enumerable method to add something to a set is to use this double arrow like that. So we could say fish. Right, so now my set is cat, dog, bird, fish. If I try to run that again, Ruby is a friendly language. It really doesn't yell at you unless you do something that it can't recover from. It's not like, already have fish in set, woo, or whatever it is that most other languages like to yell at you about. This is like, yeah, that's okay. You've already got one, right? This is like my polite students. Like, yeah, you already said that, or you're crazy, or you hang it up for the day, or whatever it is that they're thinking about. They don't actually say it. They're just like, okay, yeah, that's Stolly. That's what he does. All right. And of course, we get other things like my set. I believe we should get a push method. No, we don't. I'm thinking JavaScript. Let's look at our. Okay, these are going to be all of our. Ooh, this is a good method in enumerable. Any, right, passes each element of the collection to the given block. The method returns true if the block ever returns a value other than false or nil. Right? Any word of length greater than 3. Right? So this is another case where we're using blocks to go through. Right? In fact, I'm going to just totally cheat here because this is going to work with our set. So all we're asking here with this particular block, so if I say my set, any, is there any word in this set whose length is greater than or equal to 3, right? And it's just going to say true, right? So for some reason I wanted to make sure that, I had elements in the set with that much, right? We get that. Let's go back to array. Okay, so here's our method. Again, this is so much better organized, I think, than the. Okay, so we get our properties. So we get things like length. I think set has a length too. You could say my set length 4, right? Meaning how long it is. And again, here we go with duck type, right? Carl.length 4, because there's 4 characters in my name. This is our duck type language. And notice that both of these methods return an integer. What else have we got here? I'm looking at the damn JavaScript documentation. Thank you. See, that's when you need to be noisy students. Is you're like, Sally, you're looking at the array. I thought that looked different. Isn't that funny? I mean, at least the Ruby and JavaScript are consistent with that length method. Holy moly. Okay. So those are accessor things. Now, that's the one part I do like better about. Oh, okay, here we go. So if we click that little thing, now we can see all of our nice array methods. So, and again, this thing in most languages, like even the plus sign, right, with integers. This is a wacky, fun thing to show. So we can say 5 plus 5 in Ruby, right? Or we can say 5 dot plus 5. Also 10. This construction is shorthand for calling the plus method with the same dot syntax as anything else. Same thing with this. So we can say my set, call that method, right, with the actual dot, and then put, I don't know, what don't we have on here? Puppy? Yes, it should be. Thank you. Right? So even though these things are punctuation, they are first-rate methods in Ruby, and it just allows you to have these sloppier syntaxes. Like we can't do, right, we can do array like that with a space, but we can't do array length, right? It's going to complain about an undefined local variable length. Okay, but some of these shorthand things. Comparison operators, we'll hit that stuff more in. Okay, we can join things. 54 more. Okay. Yeah, see, there's a push method. That's a very good point. Yep.
Ruby keeps saying try, but I see a lot of methods that are repetitive and kind of accomplish the same thing. Is there an efficiency or implementation difference? Or
Yes, it has something to do with the way that it's right. Like you would need a different definition of length on an array than you'd need on a string.
I guess my point is the push and then the double equals for an array. Why two things depend on an array? Push would do the same thing, and so would the two arrows.
Yes, it would.
So, interesting.
And part of that is, again, it's developer comfort. Sometimes it might make more sense to call the actual push method, and sometimes it makes sense if you've just got one value you need to stick on the end of an array, or you're looping through a block or something. It might just be more elegant to use those two arrows and say, we're sticking this on, we're sticking this on, we're sticking this on, versus the push method. Okay. And like I said yesterday, Ruby is no different from any other programming language on the planet, in that there's multiple ways to do the same exact thing, right? And you can even alias things if you want to. We see here we've got a 2A method. So we could do something ugly like this. We could do my set 2A, right? And we could do 2A push bird. So now we're changing it to an array. We're calling the push method, and we're adding another bird onto the end. And if we put this back to, I think we could do a 2 set.
What is it, 2A?
2A is to array.
Okay.
Set 2A converts the set to an array. The order of elements is uncertain. Okay, I think it's time for one more 5-minute break. Then let's do some Sinatra and kind of start talking about how Ruby and the web get stitched together. We'll also talk about gems and actual straight-up requiring things.
Do you want to finish showing them there's an extension you need to put on your browser, right, and download them for DevDocs Online, or does it?
I think it works automatically. There's a preferences pane.
For me, I use Chrome, so I basically had to install an app and then
Oh, okay.
like
Yeah, I think that this, provided that if you just, at least with Firefox, it might be different on web-based browsers, but it remembers these preferences and basically uses your local storage cache on your browser to hang on to these things. There was an app, and my thing is all screwed up. Yeah, the Dash app. I don't know if this is still working anymore. This is another thing that I love. It's arguably not the same. I'm not sure if you can get Dash anymore. There used to be on the App Store too, and now I'm not sure if it is. Yeah. But devdocs.io is all browser based, and I believe it persists. Should persist. Which is great interface, right? Like no, click here to create an account or log in with Facebook. It's like, oh, you want to use this documentation here? We'll download it to your browser. Mm-hmm.
And the organization, I liked it better than the actual movie.
I know, yeah. Like this has become my go-to set. There's certain things I miss, like that quick paragraph of alphabetic things. But if you click on that little hamburger icon on this, it will give you the list of all the methods.
It automatically downloads CSS, HTML, and HTTP, and JavaScript.
Say that one more time.
It automatically downloads CSS,
oh yeah,
DOM events, HTML, HTTP, and JavaScript.
yeah.
It's not amount of use, but whatever.
Well, it's always good. We need to check on some global property in HTML. You have it at your fingertips, even if you don't have an internet connection. Useful in a zombie apocalypse if you're doing some web development. All right, so. All right, so let's do 5 minutes.
I'd much rather not be in that situation. True that.
That's it, final. Some of those games, I've got friends with them, just like, oh wow, that's a video game. Let's try some stuff. How was your semester? I know you fidget about highly. How you fidget about highly?
Yeah, it's about entirely. Okay. So, hence this class and hence me.
What do you have to take?
Probably. The desktop and the desktop app.
That's the only thing wrong.
I think they have the Windows 10 guide. That's why they're using the class. They said they're going to work the what's that, the MCT, that exam basically.
Excuse me.
Hey, David, so stop saying that this time. Let's just say, to put it bluntly, I once, a couple weeks back, I said left lady to that ID, and the girl started swimming at me.
What were you saying?
Left lady too.
Oh.
And we were just like in the hall, and one random girl started swimming at me.
What?
Sexist. Oh my god, I'm like,
Yeah.
yawn, good night.
Yeah, I mean, I see the perspective.
And I call it junk and try and pick a fight over nothing.
And that's your perspective. So that's the beauty. We all have different perspectives. Power bank.
And ankle.
Power bank.
You make someone battery, yes. That's a long time.
About 2 hours.
Train. What line?
GNSS.
You like take CK, FM?
Yeah, you take a shuttle?
Yeah. Like on the same line. How am I in here before you? This doesn't make sense.
Well, I was here, but then I was being lazy, so I took the 29 bus instead of walking all the way here.
You know the bench isn't working anymore, right?
Well, I got my cell phone to pass.
Okay.
If not, I went through all around the shuttle, so.
Yeah, I just drive. My plan is for these days is for that. Train to Union, BNSF also. Shuttle here.
Where do you get up?
Western Springs.
Oh,
But you,
make one.
yeah, but. What is it, like
Do
an
you live
hour?
in Westchester?
Yes.
I live in Brookfield.
Nice.
I would take the same train, but it's just so expensive.
Yeah, it's cheaper than parking.
Yeah, that's
Well, not if you park on Michigan. If you find spots, you're early enough.
Sure.
But then you have to go with rush hour traffic, so it's, yeah.
Pain in the neck.
So you're in tough seat. In the train, you can do anything. I've taken naps. I've played games. They're trying to get Wi-Fi on all the planes on the trains now.
Fun. Totally. Good news. Doesn't need to be.
Yeah.
So.
Did you grow up there?
Born and
Where'd you
raised.
go to high school?
Would have gone to LT if I was homeschooled, so
Oh,
my
okay.
whole family went to LT this time. Well aware of several things about LT. I still have friends who went there, so
I went there too. I graduated in 2012.
nice. Still some rooms without AC like you keep hearing about. Still several rooms lacking air conditioning and
Oh yeah.
have to walk all over the place in the infamous stairs up and down, up and down.
Yeah.
One thing I would say about LT is LT is actually not really cheaper.
Is what?
It is not really cheaper. The LT grad knows the LT cheaper.
The cheer?
Something like that?
No, I don't remember that.
All right.
I'll ask my mom what it is like PhD or something.
Oh yeah, for sure.
If you see it, you'll probably remember actually.
So,
You go to any of the sports things?
Well, I did swimming. Yeah. So I do like the swim cheer.
all right, so let me just add this. Okay. So I'm going to create a directory called Sinatra in here where I'm going to spend the rest of the hour with you. And we're going to use a little lean web framework called Sinatra. Let's see. Where's their crazy? They have like a simple intro. That might be the thing. There we go. Okay. So, welcome to the hello world of things. So, Sinatra is our first foray into the world of gems. And one of the things that I love about, one of the many things that I love about RB environment and RVM too, even though we're not going to use that, is that we can install gems without elevated privileges. If you use a system Ruby, you have to type sudo gem install, right? And the problem with that is that it's unnecessary. Every time I start running sudo and then let somebody else stick a file or code or something on my computer, I'm just expecting bad things. So we can do something like gem install Sinatra. And I'm also going to install a gem that we're going to be using with Rails called Haml. All right? And I can install both of those gems by just saying gem install Sinatra and Haml. All right? And you'll notice that even though I said give me Sinatra give me Haml. One of the things that the gem packaging system does, like any good package manager, is keep track of all of the dependencies. So Sinatra relies on a gem called tilt, and it uses rack protection and musterman. I think tilt is actually the things that I was wrestling with last night. And of course, Sinatra just came out in version 2.0.0. Let's talk about that. Those three numbers, right? Because you'll see gems universally, 2.07, 2.00, 1.00. These are all pretty boring ones. That's what happens when you get close to a point release like that. We go to semver.org, semantic versioning. Okay, each of these decimal, or even not even really decimals, each of these numbers has a specific purpose. So you get a major version, that's in this case of semantic versioning 2.0.0, that's a major version release, which means that your old API will no longer work with the new framework. Okay, so that's why the minor version is when you add functionality in a backwards compatible manner. So even though the book we are reading this term is Rails 5.0, Rails is now out in 5.1, which means we can continue to write 5.0 style code. There are some new additions in 5.1, but we could still write 5.0 in that version, okay? And then finally, we have a patch version, that's the smallest number, when you make backwards compatible bug fixes, right? So if you see version 3.2.1, it's the third major version, the second minor version, they've added functionality to version 3 twice, and 1 is the patch change, which means that 3.2.1 is an improvement over 3.2.0, or so we would hope, right? Corrected some bug fixes, which, given my troubles with Sinatra last night, I'm very eager for them to release Sinatra 2.0.1, as we'll see here in a bit. I did. I haven't been able to track it down because it's one of those things that usually a good error message thrown into Google will show up like, oh, that's an error with this thing. This one, there were 4 results, all of them from about May 1st. So it's a very fresh, very new error. So it's entirely possible that my home computer, which is where I was working last night, which is why I'm installing Sinatra here now, that there's something just edge KC in there that was causing this feature that I'll show you not to work. What was annoying is that it was working in another system that I didn't want to use. All right, so Sinatra, which I'll just give this speech while it's installing all the documentation. Ooh, we should talk about RI too. RI also, I mean. So Sinatra, in the words of its own documentation, is a DSL, which let's follow their little link for DSL. Does anybody know what DSL is? Not in an internet connection context, Dean. Domain-specific language. So one of the powers that Ruby has that's way beyond the content of this class is that you can do metaprogramming in Ruby, meaning that you can use Ruby to create your own languages that do interesting kinds of things. Of course, can you tell me, we'll create their Hello World app here in a second, but can you tell me what pattern this looks like that we just saw from this morning? Get, and then a slash, and then do. What came after do all morning long? A block, which is exactly what this is, and a lot of domain-specific languages do that. This is a method. What do we think the method's name is? Yeah, it's get. So if we were creating this from scratch, right, we would have def get, and then we would need what? A path, probably, right? That's what this little string is here. That's just a path. That's saying the root, right? When you go to example.com, like that, that's what we want to do. And then syntax that I won't trouble you with, but we would do a yield somewhere in here, which is what allows us to execute some arbitrary block, right? So the way that blocks work is it's basically like a shadow or a ghost method, or rather ghost piece of code that gets passed to the method like an argument, okay? So let's see how my installation is going here. There we go, yay. Perfectly timed, okay? Ooh, Haml 5.01, although I think that's what I was running at home. So what can you tell me about Haml 5.01, semantic version aware people? What version of Haml is this? 5. How many patch releases is it, or how many minor releases it has? 0. There's been 1 bug release. So something was wrong in 5.0.0 that has been corrected here in HAML 5.0.1. Okay, so I will, here in Sinatra, I will do touch, and I can call this anything I want. I'm going to call it app.rb. All right, if I go into Sinatra here, and for some reason, there we go. All right, so the first thing I need to do is require the Sinatra gem. Okay, yes?
Where are these gems looked up? They're looked up in your...
They are looked up in your gem path. So let me see if I can remember. Okay, so there's an environment object, and hopefully none of this is going to give away anything terribly personal or incriminating. There's an environment, what? What is this thing? First of all, what can you tell me from capital ENV? What is that called in Ruby? When we see all capital screamy letters like that, it's a constant, okay? Which means that when we look, technically a constant should be immutable, right? You cannot change a constant. That's the whole reason it's called a constant. But Ruby is crazy and it'll let you modify a constant, all right? But technically you shouldn't modify a constant. So I've got some old Twitter keys that are probably expired here. I've got a temp directory, right? I've got some other variables. There's my user, so I can ask Twitter, like, who am I? Oop, that's right, we're a string. Okay, so that's my user. So all these different kinds of things. There should be, unless that's part of Ruby internals, can we do... All right, there's my RB environment directory. I think there's a gem path somewhere in here too. Yeah, there's my Ruby lib, there's my gem rehash. Okay, so all of this stuff is kept on board. So that's why I don't have to specify a path of gem file, which makes really good sense, right? Because if you and I are collaborating on some kind of project, we want to be able to just write our scripts and get on with it. I don't want to be like, well, when I go and check out work from Tarun, I have to remember to change the path to my gem files or something like that. So part of the gem system and how it works with Ruby is that it knows where to look for those things, right? All right, so we can do this require Sinatra, and then we can do, let's do, of course, our hello world code where we say get slash do, and we're not doing puts, we're just saying hello world, right? Which means what's going to happen from this? What do we expect? Okay, sure. And how do we now start a web server with this thing? Tarun's done some reading. Here we go. All right, so if we do Ruby, right, which again, we're calling on the Ruby program, Ruby language, that's parser, parse our app.rb. We do that, then we get our taking the stage on 4, 5, 6, 7, which personally, if you're a Sinatra fan, it's 6, 5, 6, 7, 8, not 4, 5, 6, 7, but what are you going to do? So we can go to port 567. All right, so if I go to localhost 4567, there's our hello world. Okay? And importantly, you can see the requests that are coming in here, right? And including my copy of Firefox looking for a fav icon that does not exist, right? We're getting these HTTP 404 errors, right? Versus when we actually go to slash, right? This looks exactly like what we've got in the language there. Get slash, right? That's what we wrote in our Ruby, get slash. Now this is just a literal slash there. The same deal. We're using the HTTP 1.1 protocol and we're getting a response of 200, right? So this is a case of Sinatra very faithfully following our HTTP verbs, right? Let's go to the, actually I should have gone to the docs.io for HTTP, right? Here's the MDM documentation. So we have These are the different request methods that we get from HTTP, right? 90% of the time, when you're reading the news, when you're checking your email, when you're looking at photographs on Instagram, you're relying on GET request, right? So it's a method that requests a representation of the specified resource. Requests using GET should only retrieve data, okay? All right? Head is more of a developer kind of thing where you're only asking for the head, right? Let's go ahead and open this up. We'll do some flashbacks to 361 and 362 with me. We can do things like curl, verbose, localhost 4567. Okay, so this is what your browser is doing every time you access a website, right? It's trying to find this local host. Here it tells me it's connected, and now this is my browser talking. In this case, it's just a command line thing called curl, but it's saying, here's my request. I want to get the resource that's at slash using HTTP 1.1. Here's the host I'm asking for. Here's me identifying myself as curl version 7.51.0. Now, whether curl follows semantic versioning or not, I'm not sure. Ruby gems pretty much universally will be shunned if they don't follow semantic versioning. Something like curl, I don't know that they use the same scheme as that, right? And then finally my browser is saying, I will accept */*, meaning I will accept any kind of wacky data. Whatever you think lives at that resource, I will take it, right? And where does that */* come from? It's a pattern. What does star usually mean? Okay, wildcard, you said anything, right? Yeah, it means anything. But why anything / anything? Why not just say, I will just accept star? Where do we see slashes? We do, but this is not a path. This is a wildcard / a wildcard. This comes from MIME types. Multi-part internet mail extension. Here we go to MDN again. Right? So the structure of a MIME type is its type / its subtype. So for example, here are some familiar ones you might have seen before. Text plain, which means that's just a plain text file. Text HTML is usually what we get when we get a response from a website, right? It's returning a text type and specifically the subtype of HTML. If we're asking for images, we'll get image JPEG or image PNG, audio, and so on, right? So, and here is a case where we've got, I will accept audio in any form, right? So we're saying * / audio. I don't know that you can do a * / OGG. I will accept any type in OGG because most of these things, again, these are internet standards, right? But here this is saying I will accept any audio file you want to give me. So if we go back to my curl here, okay, so these arrows, this is the last line that my browser says to the server is like, I will accept anything, * / text plain, text HTML, audio OGG, whatever you got for me. Then, now this is the little web server that we get fired up with from Sinatra saying, okay, I've found something at exactly that path that you've requested. Here is its content type, right? So there is the text HTML part, which is just responding to our request. If we said we would only accept text plain, we would get a different error. Because then the server would say, well, I only have this HTML, or it might try to shoehorn the HTML and just give us raw HTML source code that we could look at. Here we're using our character set of UTF-8, so this is a case where the web server is setting the header, right? We'll see this in 5 seconds when we write a little bit of HTML. That we specify the character set in the HTML, but the better way to do it is to serve it as a header. Content length is 11 bytes. HELLO space WORLD. Right? That's awesome. You get exactly 1 byte per character. Okay? We have some cross-site scripting protection here. No sniff, that sounds a little suspect. Frame options, okay, same origin policy. And now here's our server. So we're running a server called WebBrick 1.31, and this is one of these things like where my web server is spilling a lot of guts here, right? If somebody is out there designing exploits to try to bring down my web server, they now know what version of Ruby I'm running, so that if they find out some carefully crafted exploit will bring down Ruby, I'm screwed. So, but again, WebBrick is usually not a production-based server. We're going to use something else. We use Nginx, or we'll use Apache, or we'll use something else that might not. I mean, you have to configure it correctly, right, Dean? It'll still spill its guts all over the place. But we might not get such a verbose response. Finally, it's giving me the date and time of the request. This is an ISO date. GMT stands for what? Greenwich Mean Time or Greenwich Meridian Time, also known as UTC, Universal Time Coordinates, right? So it's dinner time over in the UK. And then we're having a keep alive connection, which means it's going to try to persist that connection in case I have any additional responses. But too bad on the server because curl closes itself as soon as it's done. Although it says here it's left the localhost connection intact. There's my hello world, and this little angry % means there was no end of file, right? Which is why we always want to have that blank line so we don't get little angry things like that. Okay? So that's what all is happening. Now, I'll pick on Kelly today. From, and of course I can do my string interpolation. I think we can get this. I think Sinatra will reload itself. It might not. Yeah, we gotta knock it down and build it back up again. Like it caches most of its methods. Here we go. Aha, of course you're going to do that. Why is it doing it? Before we look at the code, why am I getting a literal? It is a string. This is Ruby. Every single line of this is Ruby. Now, it's using APIs that are part of Sinatra, but all the rules about these things. That's exactly right. We can't do string interpolation on a single quoted string. Now, does it matter that Kelly's name is single quoted? No. Right. Right, we're not doing anything fancy with that, so we can just do that. So now, and of course we'll probably have to restart this again. There is a Sinatra gem that you can install that will rebuild on every request. Okay. There we go. Okay. This is the basic pattern with a whole lot more firepower, with a whole lot more databases and things like that we will get when we start working with Rails next week. That there will be some, and it's compressed, but there will be some request that comes into some path, and then that path will set some instance variables. Here, this is just a literal string, but what this might be would be something like user.find Kelly, right? And we would get a whole bunch of stuff coming back, and we might get like user.name. So this is the direction we're headed. It can be sometimes very hard to go from these little meatball methods and stuff like that on up to like the full API of Rails, but that's kind of where we're headed. So let's see what we can do. Is there a way for us to create this instance variable and do something in this path so that we can say hello world from whomever happens to ask for a particular path? Let's look at the Sinatra documentation, right? So there's our Ruby My App. There's all the stuff that Tarun told us almost word for word. Do you have an eidetic memory?
I'm very familiar with this. When I was working, I wanted to avoid Rails because it seemed too beefy for my purpose.
Okay, sure. And
So I found this, and I was very happy with it.
if you don't need a whole lot of database power, or if you're dealing with open APIs and things like that, Sinatra can be a really great choice.
The only thing is, I don't know, if you get a chance to look how you can distribute paths across multiple files.
With Sinatra?
Yeah, because I was not able.
Yeah, you would actually do a module.
Got it.
Yep. Or you could open up, like, because a fancier way of doing this would be to do my app inherits from Sinatra, and then you can define everything you want in here. And now that you've got a class going, you can separate that class up over multiple files. You could do a module too. In this very simple instance, we could just do a class like that.
So how does it search for the paths? Like, what if I have another file where there's another route called get/?
Right. Well, so you would have your main app.rb, and then you would just do something like require like my app / special route or something like that. So you would have some main file that has to get called to fire it up. That would be responsible not only for requiring the Sinatra gem, but also requiring any other special files.
And how would those paths get loaded up? Would I get the module approach, like that makes sense, but would it make sense would it work with a class or no?
It would work with anything. Here, I'm referring specifically to, and this is kind of wrong, but you would refer to like the path of that. If I have a file called special route RB right in the directory where my main application is, then I could just name it like this. Yeah, we should look at the docs for the require statement, but I believe require begins by looking for a file named that in wherever you happen to be executing your current thing. If it doesn't find a file, then it talks to gems. If it doesn't find it, or it probably talks to Ruby first. And if it doesn't find it there, then it talks to your gem set to see if it can find a gem that's matched as that name. So here are all of the route methods, right? Get, post, put, patch, delete, which are all methods that are defined in Sinatra, and they just so happen to match get, post, put, delete, all of the methods that we get from HTTP. We'll see this next week in Rails, where its controllers are arranged around CRUD methods, which stands for, you know what that is, Kelly? Oh, there was a slight bit of recognition in your face. CRUD, create, read, update, and delete. Those are pretty much the 4 operations that we would expect to do with any piece of data. You can create it, you can read it, you can update it, or you can get rid of it. All right. So back to our documentation here. All right, we got little things about, okay, so here's one. Route patterns may include named parameters accessible via the params hash. So I can do get hello name do, and now it will provide me with this params hash, and I can grab that name object on it. So if I change up my app, and we don't even have to add the hello part, we should be able to do a named route right here. We can do params name. Right? So we're still using an instance variable here, and I'm doing that mostly because that's the kind of style that you'll see from Rails. All right, so now we should be able to do get / any name we like, and we should say hello world from whatever that name is. So let's kill our server. And where were we running that thing right here? All right, there's Tarun's URL. Isabel will say hello to everybody. Oop, there we go. Kelly has her own URL, and Dean, and poor TK who's asleep over there. TK, hello. Your name's up there. We just created a URL just for you. That's okay, it happens. Believe me, if I wasn't standing and talking, I would be totally asleep against something too. All right. Now, one other question, because we'll see this when we're doing testing in Ruby or in Rails. We'll also see this when we're doing deployment. Why do we have to add that colon onto the URL? To specify the port. What on earth does that even mean, Tarun? That we've got a port. Okay, and not only does a web server listen on a specific port, right? The average American imagines the internet connection as like some massive tube that comes into their computer and it does internet-y things. But we've got very particular ports. So for example, if you go to our course website, right? This is a sad overview page that I desperately need to update. So I'm running HTTPS everywhere now. Does anybody know what port is implied here. 443, that's the port that we use for SSL. If we were using regular HTTP, that comes across which port? 80, okay? Now, those ports are so common by default, although Firefox developer, if you go to Safari or something, if you put in :80 after a web address, it'll just get rid of it, be like, yeah, smart pants, like we know, port 80, that's where we make our web requests, right? And again, these are not formalized international standards, but they are agreed upon standards. Like we can see standard port numbers list. Right, so here's all of these TCP, right, which is itself a standard specification. So if you're doing FTP, good old FTP on port 20, SSH always opens up on port 22 unless you tell it otherwise. Old school telnet. Mail, if it's unencrypted, is over port 25, right? So all of these things have very specific, right? There's HTTP on port 80, pop mail on port 110, all these things, right? There's IMAP mail, right? And generally speaking, ports below 1,000, right? Am I correct about that, Dean? TCP, I believe ports 1,000 and below are privileged ports, meaning that you can't just, yeah.
Usually people say go over 2,000.
Over 2,000? Okay. So, which is to say that a lot of times if we're using a development grade web server, like rack here on port 4567, that's port 4,567, meaning it's a high numbered port, meaning it is not a privileged port. So we don't have to say, oh, I'm an administrator, it's totally okay to listen on this port. One thing that you may find interesting, if you're like me and you can't get enough different sources of documentation, you can run the gem, let me clear this screen out so you can actually see. We can run gem server. So just like we used gem install before to install Sinatra, we can say gem server, and it will say that it is started a server at HTTP 00008808, okay? Which means it's listening on all interfaces, which means we can use localhost, and we can go to port 8808. All right. And here's our Ruby Gems documentation index. So if I want to, okay, there we go. It's taking its sweet time. All right, so I can find out where's the Sinatra documentation. There it is. And it gives me both the RDoc, which gets generated automatically from Sinatra's source code, or it gives me the web address from whence that gem came. Here it gives me even its dependencies. So if I click on the RDoc, then this will give me all of Sinatra's classes and modules. Right? If I look at Sinatra itself, okay, it just has one thing to it. It has a constant, which is a version, so we can always find out what version of Sinatra we're running. Right? I should be able to do that. I am running Sinatra version. And that will probably be just a number, so let's say Sinatra v dot, I don't like that behavior at all when I'm adding my own single quote at the end of the thing, and then I have to work harder. Okay. Oops, we're going to have to fire that back up again. Someplace away from our gem server. All right. There we go. And you'll notice I've still got my gem server running on 8808. That's totally cool. I've got a completely different web server running on localhost 4567. Oh, that's right. We need a name. Dean. I am running. There we go. See? So we just called up that constant right there. Does that make sense, Kelly? You have the nicest little smile of recognition on your face. Maybe I'm trying to force it today and keep saying, like, Kelly's getting it, Kelly's getting it. Oh. Oh, okay. But does that make sense of what we just did here? Right? Because we looked at the documentation. We said, what does this Sinatra thing have? And now I can't find it. Okay? All we know is that it's just got a constant in it. Okay? And that constant is version. So if we call up module, and again, there we go. So we know this is a module. So we can't do Sinatra new. So it's organized as a module. The one thing in that module is its version, which is a very common thing in GEMS, that you'll put your version up inside that module.
The way I had port explained to me is IP address is the address of the house and port is the apartment number.
That works, yeah. So there's our Sinatra application class, which apparently has no methods of its own. And again, some classes and methods are going to be documented better than others. Okay, so let's see. We've got some time. I'm not as panicked as I was before I looked at my watch. I got a whole 30 minutes. Okay, so one thing that is sad here, though, is if I do view selection source, oh, look at Sinatra trying real hard. Look at that. Good, Sinatra. Even though I'm passing it a string, it's doing its best to put what in there? HTML, right? And HTML, is this valid standards compliant HTML?
Well, it's the minified. You can look at the minified HTML, right?
That's true. I did view selection source, didn't I? Let's double check this. I want to just do the raw page source. Sinatra may not be as nice in this view. Okay, it's not. So, which is actually kind of good. This makes me happier about Sinatra, that if I say just put down a string by itself, Sinatra's like, yes, sir. String coming right up, okay? So what I had accidentally done before, just so that because again, when we're working with Rails and something weird is happening, you're going to want to look at your source, figure out what's happening, right? I had a 0 or something here that was selected. And so when I went to view source, I jumped the gun with Firefox and said view selection source. So even though there's no HTML coming down from a server, in order for the browser to try to display this sad little string of text, it inserts an HTML tag, an opening and closing head tag, a body tag where it just sticks that raw string, and then it closes it out. Okay? So this is, you can't really talk about valid HTML because this is just the browser trying to write HTML for itself. What I would like to do, though, is to create some valid HTML. And I'm going to do it 2 different ways here. All right? I'm going to do it in the way that we'll see next week when we first start writing views. And by start, I mean do it for 5 seconds before we're on to models and everything else we've got to cover. I'm going to grab this whole string, and I'm going to say herb. Right? I told you there was another herb, not just IRB, but ERB. So herb and herb. Okay? Herb, give me index. Okay? And so now what I need to do, and I'll do this and then we'll consult the documentation so you can see that I'm not crazy. So in my Sinatra app, I'm going to create a directory called views. And inside of views, I'm going to touch, thank you, index.herb. Had that little 20-minute period where the caffeine was flowing, and now I'm on the far side of it, and it's just all downhill from here. All right, so touch views index.herb. Embedded Ruby is what this stands for. So if I go over now to my views to this index.herb, now I can just write up. In fact, let's do the whole religious thing here, right? We start with our doc type declaration. For our HTML, we'll even go language en. Want to do good things and close that out. We have our head. And we can do title, OMG ERB. Okay. Then we can do our body. And before we do anything fancy, let's just do a heading 1 tag, hello from herb. Like that. Okay. You can do that. Okay, so we've just got a tiny little HTML file. That's all this is. We've called it an herb file, but right now this is just pure HTML. Before we get any fancier, let us, okay, cool. I think I'm in the app. Thank you. Oh, something blew up real nice. Oh, someone's already on port 4567. Where is that? Thank you. There we go. Okay. So now we're on port 4567. And if I go to my Dean path, hello from Herb. Okay. So, and now if I do view page source, not selection source, view page source, there is my little thing. Now, why am I getting, oh, why is that all red? Why is that bleeding all over the page, Isabel? Why isn't it nice and pretty and purple? Yes. There's a student who did really well in class with me this year. Yep. For our doc type, we need to start that thing with an exclamation point, with a bang. Now, will that reload? Okay, that will reload. Okay. Now that I'm digging into a view file, right? Boom. I did not have to restart for that thing to work. So what's happening here? It is. Let's look at the syntax in our application file here, right? What I'm saying is herb, which we expect to be a what? Use your Ruby knowledge of what kinds of things we see all the time. We think ERB is. It's an object or a no. Function, if we're an object-oriented program, we don't have functions, we have methods, right? So we expect that there is some method called herb. That's just, right? Get. It's a method, right? 9 times out of 10, if you have some word that's just sitting by itself on the start of a line, if it's not a class and it's not an object or a variable, guess that it's a method, right? And we can especially guess that this is a method because we're passing a what to it? A symbol, right? And what is this particular symbol matching up with? Yeah, it's saying herb, go somewhere, right? We're relying on a default here. Okay, if we look at the Sinatra documentation, you know how I love the documentation. Okay. Views/template. So each template language is exposed via its own rendering method. Okay. These methods simply return a string. So here is herb index. This renders views/index.herb. Okay? So that symbol is just going to be processed in the background and say, hey, go find that views directory. Should be a subdirectory somewhere from where this app is running, and go find the index.herb file. Okay? And again, that is a very Ruby construction. In most other languages, we would have something like index.rb, right? Most languages don't have a constructor like a string, or constructor isn't the right word. Doesn't have a feature like a symbol. Ruby, it generally tends to work with symbols whenever it can. And that allows us to say something like, go find the thing that is referenced as index, like that. Now, the question is, can I render this username in my herb template? And if so, how do I do it? There is. Right. So let me ask you a question. How many of you have ever written PHP before? How would we render that variable from PHP? Well, what do we have to do in order to get into PHP if we're just running plain text HTML? Yeah, what's the PHP tag? What is it? Open. Okay, open question mark, PHP. And then we would do some variable, right, which in PHP would be some variable. And then we would just close that thing, right? So in herb, we do %equals @user, right? That's our instance variable. And then close. Herb is pure PHP in terms of its syntax like that. So now we can say hello from @user. Okay? It is, but it's going to get so much nicer. But let's test this out just to see how it does. Okay? Can I get away with not OMG herb? That's our thing. Hello from Dean. And now we can go through the whole thing again, right? Hello from Kelly. Hello from Isabel. Hello from TK. Right? think we've proved the point. High decay. All right? And of course, and again, this is something that, and I tell you this because in your jobs as professionals, one day as developers or sysadmins or programmers, you're going to have some junior person who you are sadly responsible for. And this is going to be a real go-getter of a person. And he or she is not going to have had the good education that you have. And they're going to say, oh, I never bothered to learn HTML, I just learned PHP. Or I never really bothered to learn PHP and HTML, I just learned WordPress, right? And you'll be like, well, why did we hire you, right? You will find people like this, right? It might be the boss's nephew or something horrible. And you're going to have to teach this person. This is why I always say courses that we have like 361, 362 in ITM are so important because even though we've got thousands of lines of Ruby code, we've done sophisticated things passing arguments to method, what ultimately comes down the pipe into your computer, into Aunt Martha's computer, into the wingnet who you have to work with, his computer, is just raw HTML, right? To that end user, it makes no difference whether this is some static file someplace or something that's created from a database or whatever else. So this is why that standards compliance stuff matters so darn much. Now, that being said, this is ugly. This doesn't get us very far at all. In fact, this is a little bit worse than regular HTML, right? Because now we've got to deal with these almost tag-like looking things that actually are not quite tags. Okay? It's ugly. And now here's where we're going to see if I can replicate the error that I had on my other computer last night. So we'll do this for like 5 seconds in Rails. By default, Rails uses herb templates for all of its views. But those in the know prefer a different templating language. I shouldn't say those in the know. There's plenty of adherents of herb. I like something else called Haml. Okay? And Haml, I can't remember if it stands for anything. It's created in honor of Mark Hamill, who is, of course, Luke Skywalker from the Star Wars movies. So I'm going to say index from Haml. So I'm going to create a Haml. Oh, let's see, because I've only got a few minutes. So let me go to my views directory. Okay, so I've got this index.herb. And what I'm going to do is, do I have HTML2 Haml? All right, let me install this. Gem install HTML2 Haml. Guess what it does? This may not be worth it at all. I'm going to start writing it myself, and then we'll try it later. Oh, no, there it goes. 10 seconds. Thank you. All right, so I'm going to say HTML2 Haml, index.herb to index.haml. Ah. There's my index.haml. So there's herb, and here is Haml, which, that's way too crufty. So, crufty? Do we know this word? Cruft? Oh my God, this is one of the best words. Cruft. Noise and junk. It's extra baloney. Right, like Ruby is a pretty strictly anti-cruft language. Okay, we don't want a lot of cruft. So what is the cruft we're getting here? Okay, well first of all, where does cruft come from? Anybody know where this word comes from? This is awesome. It comes from a building, I believe it's at MIT, Cruft Hall. Okay, so here's the Wikipedia article. Cruft is jargon for anything that's leftover, redundant, getting in the way. So the history is that around 1958. The term was used in the sense of garbage by students frequenting the MIT Tech Model Railroad Club. But I thought there was, okay. The origin is uncertain, but it derived from Harvard University's Cruft Laboratory, built in 1915, from the unfortunately named Harriet Otis Cruft. So anyway, there you go. That's the origin of the word cruft. All right? So cruft. So let's talk about the cruft. Let's just let this thing run, okay? And now when I see that, it makes me wonder, maybe there wasn't an error after all, and maybe Haml 5 has changed, and I need to read the damn release notes. Okay? But here we go. So let's kill Sinatra. Well, let's see if it's working right, and then we'll come back and try to clean it up. Okay, so I'm going to reload. Okay, so now this is the Hamel version. So it's got this old school. This is not HTML5. This is XHTML and HTML 4.01 style, right? Isabel, do you remember what the one meta character? I just gave it away. What's the one meta tag that we need? Right, just this part. So let's decruft this, and let's do it as a series of commits. I'm going to do all right, so let's do views index.herb. And of course, I never committed the app. Ha ha ha. Git add app.rb. Added basic Sinatra app. Okay. And now I'm going to do git add dot, and we'll say git commit m. Added crufty. I won't capitalize it. Added crufty HTML to Hamel output Hamel file, and it's not capital Hamel, it's just title case. Okay, so let's decruft this. So in Hamel, to write a doc type, all you need to do is 3 exclamation marks in a row. Okay, let's double check that. Yeah, doc type HTML, that's our HTML5 doc type. These used to be sprawling and ugly. Here we're calling our first tag. So in Hamel, to open a tag, you just use the % and then HTML or whatever the tag name is. If we have any special attribute and value, we do a what? Rubyists, what is this? It's a hash, right? And it's using the old school syntax. I don't know if we can get away with the new school syntax, but let's find out. I believe we can. Right? That looks even nicer. If we reload this, yep, no change. Let's just check it. Language French. Francois. Or Francois. I spoke German. Should go DE. There we go. DE German. Okay, so we can agree. Deutsch. Right? This is changing. So we can get away with our newer school, less crufty hash syntax. All right? Then we open up the head. And as Isabel pointed out, all we need anymore is just the character set part of this. And we don't even have to do the screamy part here. We can make this lowercase if we want, UTF-8. We can get rid of the rest of this cruft. And we can even get rid of this slash part because we're not breaking onto multiple lines anymore. Okay? And now when we want to have content inside of a tag, we just say OMG herb. And then we're back out. Notice that HTML is open, we expect it to be. Head is open, we expect it to be. Meta and title are open like that. And then we're to body. So one of the things that is awesome about about Hamel versus herb is herb, we still have to do all of the ceremonial, right? We open the HTML tag, we create our file, and then we shall close the HTML5 tag, right? We don't have to do that kind of ceremony, right? This is ceremonial code. It needs to be there, but we, as very smart, sophisticated Ruby developers, have better things to do than write closing HTML tags and things like that, which is why Ruby is so much, well, Hamel, which is a product of the Ruby community, right? This is Ruby, basically, right, with a domain-specific, this little part. If we want to run some content, we can just pop it in like that, or if we wanted to, we can indent further. And that's the other point I want to make, is that our nesting is done by levels of indent. Guess how many levels of indent? 2 spaces, right? And when we want to close a tag or get out of a nested structure, we just back out 2 spaces. So again, Hamel looks very much like Ruby in that indentation is significant, and it's also necessary, or you'll throw errors with this. So then we create body, we create h1, and then we go hello from @user. Okay? What's that construction there? Good old interpolated string. Now, here's what was screwing up last night. Let's see if I can fix this thing. Ooh, let's make this English again. Hallo aus at user. Okay.
So in this case, Ruby supports Haml. That's why we're able to do this, right?
Right. Ruby supports Haml. I installed the Haml gem, and Sinatra is Haml aware. Now, I don't think you get Haml out of the box with Sinatra, meaning that Sinatra does not download Haml as one of its dependencies. But if you use Haml, Sinatra includes, right? Let's go back to our app. It includes a Haml method to serve up Haml in the case that we have the Haml gem installed.
And it takes care of parsing the Haml to HTML.
Right. Right, and this is a sophisticated, if we dug through the code, we would find out that it does not require, that Sinatra will not require Haml unless it encounters a call to this Haml method. Okay, so that does some lazy loading and things like that. So that you have as small, again, on well-written gems, as small a footprint as possible in terms of the total amount of code. Okay, so we're calling this up. Now, this is all good. There's TK's name. Now, this is a thing that's changed in Haml, is they've gotten rid of all of their nice indentation, which makes me sad. There is a way to fix that. But this is definitely more efficient when you're worried more about the bytes that mobile users are drawing down and things like that. Now, what we can do, or at least used to be able to do, and I need to read the damn release notes because maybe that's what the issue is. We used to be able to do this. We could do pre equals and then at user, like that. Okay, so there's a pre-tag in HTML. This could just as easily be H1, or it could be paragraph. And then we could use the equal sign on it, and then it would evaluate that whole line as Ruby. But this last night was giving me errors. Okay. It's fine. There's something borked with my setup at home, because that is perfectly content. Right? This is the pattern that you want to use when you're mixing content like that. I'm going to have to go back and look at what I did. It could just be that I had no business programming at 11 o'clock last night. Right? So I think we could agree that this is even prettier when we can just say equals at user, right? And of course, when we get into Rails and things like that, we'll have a more complex instance object where we can call user.name and all these kinds of things. But there we go. So let's look at this. Yeah, there's TK. Yeah. So either way, I think you can agree with me that when we look at herb and we look at Haml, that Haml is a much cleaner syntax. Now what we really need to do is to find a language package for Atom to do syntax highlighting on Haml for us, so we don't have to look at this sad white-only text. Now, here's the other cool thing that I love about Haml. If we wanted to create a unique ID, we can just say, body ID home like that. If we wanted to create a class like P class user, we can use the same syntax that's derived from where? Where do we see this? Body hash home p.user. I see how you got there, and if that were the way we were going, that would be absolutely correct. These are CSS selectors.
Oh, okay.
Right? Yeah. Right. So we can do body hash home, and so if I go and reload this page now I've got body ID home, I've got P class user in there, which, want to talk about cruft, when you start adding all these classes and IDs and stuff like that to herb, then it gets really, really ugly, and it gets really hard to spot where your actual Ruby code is. All right? All right, yeah, well, you can see why I love it so much, but you can also see why it's good to have a foundation in standards compliant HTML so you can understand that this is doing everything that it's supposed to do. Maybe next week I'll wait for the views week. When we get into the views week, we'll do little stylistic annoyances for me, like I like to have double quoted attribute values and things like that. Okay, it's 1:05. So this afternoon, I'm going to go home. I'm going to pet my dog. Then I'm going to get to work. Just being honest, full disclosure. I'm going to pet the dog. And And then I'm going to put together the just very quick instructions for the repository where you can put all of your book work. You'll fork it. I'm not even going to ask you to send me an email like, here's where my repository is. You'll just fork it, and I'll be like, oh, okay, I'm assuming I can figure out who everybody is, right? Even if one of you has a total wingnut GitHub account, I can probably figure out by process of elimination of who's who. And then you'll just push your work there. I will also include like a little demo, and I'll go through like the first chapter or two myself and just say, here's how I would do this kind of thing, right? And then some suggestions to, again, commit early and commit often. Test things out, make them improved, and then we can do, here we go, let's see. What's our diff right now? Okay, there's our decrufted. Yeah. Decrufted Hamel view. All right. I'm around all weekend, all week and all weekend. If you have questions, you run into problems, if you're in the reading and something doesn't make sense, that is your moment to get on Basecamp and say, what is going on in chapter 8, right? And point out the examples so we can have a discussion about it. I don't want you to only feel connected to the community in the class when you're here, and obviously for the people who are online to just be sadly watching these videos and have questions of their own. So get in the habit of doing that stuff, because that's how we'll have discussions and get further places. All right?
Next Tuesday, we should have read up to when?
The whole book. Yeah. Welcome to a 6-week class. Now, fortunately, I mean, true and hold it up. It's not a massive book, right? And a lot of that is source code, so it should be completely, yeah. That gets, here, pass it to me. Look how thin it is. Mine's even thinner. It's on my iPad. I always like to do that with my family. My poor aunt one summer, I was like, oh man, my iPad's getting so heavy. I got all these books on it. She's like, really? I'm like, no. Electrons have no mass. I didn't know they did that. All right? So, yeah, so whole book. But again, it's a lightning fast read, and we're in a lightning fast class. Like technically, we've met twice. We've had 2 weeks worth of class in 2 days. So there you go. Probably a little bit more than 2 weeks in 2 days. So we're moving fast, obviously. But that's why I want you to ask lots of questions, and we'll continue the discussion so that it isn't between now and next Tuesday morning that you think about this class. All right?
For the C projects, do we get to pick our own, or are you deciding, or what's?
If you have one you want to pick, go ahead and pick it. If you don't, I will assign you one. Maybe post that on Basecamp, like picking SMEs for 513, and then you can claim your one, and if other people want to claim one, they can. Otherwise, I'll just assign them one whose difficulty will be inversely proportional to how much I like them. Right? I'm not sure if it's in the OED or not.
Looking at it, it said like recent words added and Cruft was in there.
Oh, was it really?